Colorado Territory, 1872. The summer sun beat down on the rolling plains as Zane Finley watched the dust cloud approach from the west. The heat waves distorted the distant shapes of wagons and riders into ghostly mirages that seemed to dance along the horizon. He sat astride his sorrel gelding, hat pulled low over his brow, the sweat trickling down between his shoulder blades despite the breeze that rustled through the yellow prairie grass. At 25 years old, Zane had already made a name for himself as one of the most reliable cowboys in Cottonwood Springs. His youthful face, with its straight nose and strong jawline, rarely revealed the hardships he'd endured. A light stubble shadowed his chin after days on the range, but his blue eyes remained clear and observant beneath the brim of his hat. Years of breaking horses and driving cattle had honed his body to lean muscle, giving him the quiet strength that frontier life demanded. "Looks like they're making good time," said Eli Thompson, the older rancher who had employed Zane for the past 3 years. "Might reach town before nightfall if they push it." Zane nodded, saying nothing. He had little interest in the wagon train beyond professional courtesy. The settlers would bring change to the valley, more fences, more laws, more complications. He preferred the simplicity of the open range, where a man answered only to himself and the elements. Where connections meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant pain. "Should we ride down and meet them?" Eli asked, shifting in his saddle. "Proper welcome and all that." "You go ahead," Zane replied, turning his horse away. "I need to check the south pasture before dark." Eli's weathered face creased with disappointment. "One of these days, boy, you're going to have to stop running from people. This territory's filling up. Can't outride civilization forever." Zane touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect, but offered no promise. As he rode away, the memory of his father's broken body surfaced unbidden, shot dead over a land dispute with settlers when Zane was just 16. The lesson had been clear. Attachment to people or places was a luxury a man couldn't afford in this unforgiving country. Better to keep moving, keep working, keep distant. The south pasture lay quiet in the late afternoon sun. Zane dismounted by the creek, letting his horse drink while he checked the fencing. His thoughts drifted as his hands worked, remembering his mother's words before consumption took her 2 years after his father's death. "Don't let this land make your heart hard, Zane. There's more to life than just surviving it." But survival was enough, it had to be. The frontier was no place for softer emotions. They only made you weak, made you vulnerable. Made you lose. Every grave he'd dug for friends and family had only reinforced what he already knew. Love was a luxury, and luxuries got you killed out west. As twilight deepened the shadows across the plains, Zane reluctantly turned toward town. He'd promised Eli he'd help with supplies in the morning, which meant a night at the boarding house rather than his preferred solitude at the line shack. The lights of Cottonwood Springs winked in the distance, pinpricks of civilization against the darkening wilderness. "Just one night," he murmured to his horse as they picked their way down the hillside, "then back to where we belong." The settlers' wagons had indeed reached town before nightfall, forming a circle near the creek on the eastern edge of Cottonwood Springs. As Zane rode past, he could see families gathered around campfires, the sound of children's laughter carrying on the evening breeze. He quickened his pace, uncomfortable with the reminder of what he'd chosen to live without. Main Street was unusually busy for a Wednesday evening. The arrival of new settlers always stirred excitement in the small community, bringing fresh faces and news from the east. Zane dismounted outside the livery stable, nodding to the blacksmith who stood watching the commotion. "Quite a train," the blacksmith commented. 30 wagons, they say, all the way from Pennsylvania." "They'll learn soon enough this ain't Pennsylvania," Zane replied, handing over the reins. After securing a room at the boarding house, Zane made his way reluctantly to the town's only proper restaurant, his stomach demanding attention after a long day's ride. The place was crowded, filled with locals eager to meet the newcomers and travelers grateful for a hot meal they hadn't cooked themselves. The only available seat was at a table occupied by a young woman whose back was to the door. Zane hesitated, considering whether hunger outweighed his desire for solitude. Before he could decide, the proprietress, Mrs. Holbrook, spotted him. "Mr. Finley, come in, come in." "We've got just one spot left," she called, gesturing to the table. "Miss Valenti won't mind the company, I'm sure." Trapped by politeness, Zane removed his hat and approached the table. "Evening, ma'am." "Mind if I join you?" The woman looked up and Zane felt an unexpected jolt. She was young, perhaps 21 or 22, with striking green eyes set in a heart-shaped face. Her dark brown hair was pulled back in a practical but becoming style, with a few tendrils escaping to frame her face. Unlike many of the settlers' wives with their travel-worn appearances, she looked fresh and composed in a simple blue dress that complemented her fair skin. "Please," she said with a slight smile, gesturing to the empty chair, "I'd welcome the company." Her voice carried the barest hint of an accent Zane couldn't place, not quite Eastern, something more. He sat down, uncomfortable with the strange awareness that had come over him. "Zane Finley," he offered, placing his hat on an empty chair. "Zara Valenti," she replied. "Are you from Cottonwood Springs, Mr. Finley?" "Thereabouts," he answered vaguely, relieved when Mrs. Holbrook appeared with coffee. "You with the wagon train?" A shadow crossed Zara's face. "Yes and no, I joined them in St. Louis but we're not. That is, I'm traveling alone." Zane's curiosity stirred despite himself. A young woman traveling alone through frontier territory was unusual enough to raise questions, but something in her expression warned against asking them. "The West isn't kind to solitary travelers," he said instead. "Neither is the East in my experience." Her gaze met his directly, a quiet strength behind the beauty that had initially caught his attention. Before Zane could respond, the restaurant door burst open, and a tall, well-dressed man strode in. His expensive coat and polished boots marked him as someone of means, while his imperious gaze surveyed the room with barely disguised contempt. "There you are," he said loudly, fixing his eyes on Zara. "I've been looking all over this miserable excuse for a town." Zane observed how Zara's posture stiffened, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "Mr. Hargrove," she acknowledged coolly. "I wasn't aware you needed me." The man Hargrove approached their table, ignoring Zane completely. "We have matters to discuss, privately." "I'm having dinner," Zara replied, a note of defiance in her voice that caught Zane's attention. "Whatever business you think we have can wait until tomorrow." Hargrove's face darkened. "Zaraline, this childishness has gone on long enough. Your father is not here," she interrupted sharply. "And I am no longer under his authority or yours." The tension between them was palpable. Zane found himself instinctively measuring the man, noting the way he stood, wondering if the bulge beneath his fine coat was a concealed weapon. Something protective stirred in him, surprising in its intensity. Hargrove finally seemed to notice Zane's presence, his lip curling slightly. "I see you've found local companionship." "Mr. Finley was kind enough to share his table," Zara said evenly. "As you can see, the restaurant is quite full." "Indeed," Hargrove's cold eyes assessed Zane. "Well, don't let me interrupt your dining experience with the help." Zane kept his expression neutral, though anger flickered beneath the surface. He dealt with men like Hargrove before, wealthy Easterners who viewed the local population as beneath them. "Seems to me the lady's made her wishes clear," Zane said quietly, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. "She'd like to finish her meal in peace." Something dangerous flashed in Hargrove's eyes. For a moment, Zane thought he might make a scene, but the man merely straightened his jacket. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow, Zaraline. I've secured rooms at what passes for a hotel in this place. I expect to see you there at 9. Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode out. The silence that followed felt weighted. Zara's composed expression had slipped, revealing a momentary glimpse of what looked like fear or perhaps determination, before she carefully arranged her features once more. "I apologize for that unpleasantness," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "No need," Zane replied, "though I get the feeling that man's trouble." A sad smile crossed her lips. "Maxwell Hargrove is my fiancé, or rather he believes himself to be." The statement hung between them, filled with unspoken complications. Zane knew he should leave it alone, other people's problems weren't his concern. He'd learned the hard way that entanglement only led to pain, and yet, sounds like a story there, he said, surprising himself. Zara studied him for a moment as if deciding how much to share. "A familiar one, I imagine. A business arrangement between families rather than a union of hearts. My father owed his father and I was the payment." The matter-of-fact way she described her situation stirred something uncomfortable in Zane's chest. And now I'm here," she said simply. 3,000 miles from Boston, with nothing but what I could carry and the determination not to be property passed from one man to another." Before Zane could respond, Mrs. Holbrook arrived with their meals, simple fare of beef stew and fresh bread that nevertheless smelled delicious. The interruption gave him time to consider Zara's words and the unexpected admiration they stirred in him. He'd seen courage on the frontier, men facing down blizzards or outlaws, but there was something equally brave about her journey. "What will you do now?" he asked after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. "Find work." "Make a life," her green eyes brightened with determination. "I have some education, I can read, write, and keep accounts. Surely there's need for such skills even here." Zane thought of Cottonwood Springs, with its single schoolhouse, general store, and handful of businesses. "Might be town's growing. The Thompsons, I work at their ranch, mentioned needing help with their books." "You're a rancher, then?" "Cowhand," he corrected. "Been working cattle since I was 14. "Nothing fancy." "It sounds like honest work," she said, with none of the condescension he might have expected from an educated Eastern woman. "The kind that builds something real." Her words touched something in him, a pride in his capabilities he rarely acknowledged. For a moment Zane found himself wanting to tell her more, about the land he knew like the back of his hand, the satisfaction of bringing a herd safely through dangerous territory, the peace of sleeping under stars untainted by city smoke. Instead, he asked, "How long do you plan to stay in Cottonwood Springs?" Zara glanced toward the door where Hargrove had exited. "That depends on certain factors. I had hoped to continue west to California, but my funds are more limited than I anticipated. I may need to work for a while before moving on." "California's a long way," Zane observed, "and not all of it's what the stories make it out to be." "No place ever is," she replied with a wisdom beyond her years. "But I've come to believe that home isn't necessarily where you're from, but where you choose to belong." Her words resonated unexpectedly. Zane had been drifting for years, competent and respected but deliberately rootless. The idea of choosing to belong somewhere to something struck him as both foreign and strangely compelling. As they finished their meal, the restaurant began to empty. Zane realized they'd been talking for over an hour, and he'd enjoyed the conversation more than he had any in recent memory. The realization made him uneasy. Getting involved with Zara Valenti's problems would be foolish, especially with a man like Hargrove involved. "I should get some rest," he said, rising and leaving money on the table for his meal. "Early start tomorrow." Zara nodded, something like disappointment flickering across her features. "Of course, thank you for the company, Mr. Finley, and for your intervention earlier." "Zane," he corrected, surprising himself. "Just Zane is fine." "Then I'm just Zara," she replied with a small smile. He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Good night, Zara. Good luck with your situation." As he walked back to the boarding house, Zane told himself he was doing the right thing by keeping his distance. The last thing he needed was to get caught between an Eastern woman and her fiancé, no matter how compelling he found her story or her eyes. But as he lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, Zane found himself thinking of the quiet strength in Zara's voice when she spoke of building a new life. Of the freedom she sought, so different from his own solitary existence, of the way the lamplight had caught in her dark hair. "Fool," he muttered to himself, turning over restlessly. "She's meant for another man, no matter what she says. And you're not meant for anyone." With that grim reminder, Zane forced his thoughts to the next day's work, determined to put Zara Valenti firmly out of his mind. Morning arrived with the pale gold light of early summer and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. Zane rose before dawn, as was his habit, grateful to escape the confines of the boarding house. The streets were quiet as he made his way to the livery to check on his horse before meeting Eli at the general store. He wasn't expecting to find Zara Valenti there, deep in conversation with the livery owner's wife. Both women looked up as he entered, and Zane was struck again by Zara's composed beauty, even in the simple gray dress she wore. "Good morning, Zane," she greeted him, seeming more settled than she had the previous evening. "Mrs. Reed has been kind enough to tell me about employment opportunities in town." Martha Reed, a practical woman in her 50s who helped her husband run the livery, nodded. "Miss Valenti here is looking for honest work, and I was saying she ought to speak with Eli Thompson. That wife of his has been wanting help with the accounts and the household since her health took a turn." Zane felt an unexpected jolt at the thought of Zara working at the Thompson Ranch, where he spent most of his time. "I'm heading to meet Eli now," he found himself saying. "You're welcome to join me." A genuine smile brightened Zara's face. "That would be most helpful, thank you." As they walked together down the awakening Main Street, Zane was acutely conscious of the curious glances they received. Cottonwood Springs was small enough that a newcomer was noticed, especially one as striking as Zara. "Did you have a restful night?" he asked, searching for neutral conversation. "As restful as could be expected," she replied. "The hotel had a convenient back entrance that allowed me to avoid a certain unwanted encounter." Zane frowned. "Hargrove doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily." "No," Zara agreed, her expression growing serious. "He isn't. Maxwell believes what he wants he deserves, and what he deserves he takes." "Why's he so set on you?" Zane asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. To his relief, Zara didn't seem offended. "It's not me he wants, not really. It's what I represent. My father's shipping business would be folded into the Hargrove empire through our marriage." A neat business arrangement disguised as a social union. Her voice turned bitter. "I've been groomed since childhood to be the perfect society wife, accomplished, obedient, and above all, silent." "You don't seem particularly obedient or silent to me," Zane observed. A laugh escaped her, bright and unexpected. "No, I suppose not. My father would say that's precisely the problem." They had reached the general store, but Zane found himself reluctant to end their conversation. "What made you decide to leave? Must have taken considerable courage." Zara's expression sobered. "My mother died last winter. She had lived her entire life according to others' expectations, my father's societies. On her deathbed she made me promise not to make the same mistake." Her voice softened with remembered pain. "She said, 'Zara, find the life that's meant for you, not the one they've designed for you.' 2 months later, I was on a westbound train with everything I could fit in 2 trunks." The depth of her determination impressed Zane more than he wanted to admit. Before he could respond, the door to the general store opened, and Eli Thompson emerged, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of them. "Zane, good timing, and who's this young lady?" "Eli, this is Miss Zara Valenti. She arrived with yesterday's wagon train and is looking for employment. Mrs. Reed suggested she speak with you about helping Mrs. Thompson." Eli's bushy eyebrows rose with interest. "Is that so? Well, now that's a stroke of luck. Margaret's been after me for months to find someone who can help with the books and correspondence. Our daughter used to handle it, but she's married and moved to Denver last fall." Zara stepped forward, extending her hand with confident grace. "I'm well educated in arithmetic and bookkeeping, Mr. Thompson. I also have experience managing household affairs. If you're in need of such assistance, I would be grateful for the opportunity." Eli seemed impressed by her direct approach. "Educated, you say? Where are you from originally, Miss Valenti?" "Boston, sir. My father is in shipping. I was raised to understand business operations." "Boston," Eli exclaimed. "That's quite a journey. What brings you all the way out to our little corner of Colorado?" Zane saw the momentary hesitation in Zara's eyes, the careful consideration of how much to reveal. "I'm seeking new opportunities," she said simply. "The East has become restrictive for a woman of independent mind." Eli chuckled. "Well, the West has its own restrictions, but they tend to be more about what you can do than who you're supposed to be. Tell you what, why don't you come out to the ranch today, meet Margaret and see if it might suit you? We've got a small cottage near the main house that used to be our daughter's. It would be yours if things work out." The offer was generous, more so than Zane had expected. He found himself watching Zara's reaction closely, surprised by how much he wanted her to accept. "That's very kind, Mr. Thompson," she said, a genuine smile warming her features. "I would be delighted to meet Mrs. Thompson." "Excellent. Zane can bring you out once we've finished our business here." Eli clapped his hands together, pleased with the arrangement. "Now let's see about those supplies. The new fence line won't build itself." As they entered the store, Zane felt a strange mixture of anticipation and unease. Having Zara at the ranch would certainly complicate his carefully maintained solitude. And there was still the matter of Hargrove, whose presence in town felt like a storm on the horizon. Yet as he watched Zara confidently discuss inventory methods with the storekeeper, Zane couldn't help but feel that something significant had shifted in his carefully ordered world. The question was whether that shift would lead to disaster, as his experience suggested, or to something he hadn't allowed himself to consider in a very long time. The journey to the Thompson ranch took the better part of an hour. Eli had gone ahead with the supply wagon, leaving Zane to bring Zara in the buckboard after she collected her belongings from the hotel. To Zane's relief, they had managed to avoid Hargrove, though the clerk mentioned he had been asking about Zara's whereabouts earlier that morning. Now, as the wagon rattled along the well-worn trail, Zane found himself stealing glances at his companion. Zara sat straight-backed beside him, her gaze fixed on the landscape unfolding before them. The morning sun brought out warm highlights in her dark brown hair, and the fresh air had added a becoming flush to her cheeks. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the companionable silence that had settled between them. "Different from anything I imagined." "How so?" Zane asked, curious about her perspective. "In Boston, we hear such stories about the frontier, savage wilderness, lawless territories." She gestured toward the rolling grasslands stretching to the distant mountains. "But there's an order to it, isn't there? A natural rhythm, it feels, honest somehow." Zane considered her words. "It's honest enough, dangerous too in its way. The land doesn't lie, but it doesn't forgive mistakes either." "Like the ocean," Zara mused. "My father's ships navigated by the same principle: respect the power, understand the patterns, and you might survive. Ignore them and you're lost." The comparison was apt, and Zane found himself impressed by her insight. "You've spent time on ships." A smile touched her lips. "More than was considered proper for a young lady. I used to sneak down to the docks whenever I could escape my governess. The captains knew me, they'd show me their charts, explain their navigational instruments." Her expression grew wistful. "There was freedom on those ships that I never found in drawing rooms." Zane could picture her as a young girl, curious and determined, finding her own path even then. "And now you're navigating new waters." "Yes," she turned to look at him directly, "though I admit I'm lacking proper charts for this particular journey." Something in her gaze made Zane's chest tighten unexpectedly. "Most of us out here are making it up as we go," he said, more gruffly than he intended. "You learn quick or you don't last." "And you, Zane Finley, have you learned to last?" The personal nature of the question caught him off guard. "I'm still here," he replied evasively. Zara seemed to sense his retreat. She turned her attention back to the landscape, allowing him the space he instinctively sought. The silence that fell between them was thoughtful rather than awkward, and Zane found himself grateful for her perception. As they crested a gentle rise, the Thompson Ranch came into view. A substantial two-story house surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and the bunkhouse where Zane normally stayed when not out with the herds. Beyond stretched the grazing lands that had made Eli one of the most successful ranchers in the territory. "There it is," Zane said, nodding toward the buildings. "Thompson's Reach." Eli started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle 15 years ago. "It's impressive," Zara observed. "He must be a remarkable man." "He is," Zane agreed, feeling the familiar mix of respect and gratitude he held for his employer. "Eli gave me a chance when most wouldn't." "He's tough but fair, the kind of man whose handshake means more than most contracts." As they approached the ranch, Zane saw Margaret Thompson standing on the porch, leaning slightly on her cane. Though only in her 50s, rheumatism had aged her prematurely, curbing the active role she had once played in ranch operations. Despite her physical limitations, her mind remained sharp as ever. "That's Mrs. Thompson," Zane explained. "Don't let the cane fool you, she's still the one really running this place. Eli might handle the cattle, but Margaret manages everything else." "I look forward to meeting her," Zara said, straightening her simple gray dress as best she could after the dusty journey. Zane guided the wagon to a stop near the house, jumping down to help Zara descend. For a brief moment, his hands spanned her waist, and he was struck by the delicate strength he felt beneath his fingers. Their eyes met as her feet touched the ground, and something unspoken passed between them before Zane hastily stepped back. "Welcome to Thompson's Reach, Miss Valentine," Margaret called from the porch, her voice warm despite the obvious pain in her movements. "Eli's told me about you. Come in, you must be parched after that drive." Zara moved forward with graceful confidence, extending her hand to the older woman. "Mrs. Thompson, thank you for considering me. Your home is lovely." Margaret's weathered face creased in a pleased smile. "Well, aren't you a breath of fresh air? Come inside and tell me all about yourself while these men unload your things." As the women disappeared into the house, Eli emerged from the barn, nodding approvingly. "She seems a proper lady, that one. Should be good for Margaret to have some civilized company." "She's running from something," Zane said quietly, beginning to unload Zara's 2 trunks from the wagon. "Or someone." Eli's bushy eyebrows rose. "That's so. Well, half the folks out here are running from something. Doesn't mean they can't make good here. He fixed Zane with a knowing look, including you, boy. Zane didn't reply. He carried the trunks toward the small cottage that stood a short distance from the main house. Originally built for Eli's daughter and her husband before they moved to Denver, it was a simple but comfortable structure with 2 rooms and a small porch. Inside, he found the space had been recently cleaned, with fresh linens on the narrow bed and wildflowers in a jar on the table. Margaret had clearly been preparing for a new occupant, perhaps hoping Eli would find someone in town. The thought of Zara living here, becoming part of the daily rhythm of ranch life, stirred something unexpected in Zane, a mixture of anticipation and wariness he wasn't ready to examine. By the time he returned to the main house, Margaret and Zara were seated at the kitchen table, already deep in conversation. The older woman was showing Zara a ledger book, pointing out columns with a gnarled finger. Been a mess since Jenny left, Margaret was saying. Eli tries, bless him, but numbers were never his strength, and my hands won't cooperate for writing anymore. Zara was examining the entries with focused attention. Your system is quite orderly, Mrs. Thompson. I see how you've organized it. I could certainly maintain this and prepare the correspondence you mentioned. And you'd be comfortable living in the cottage. It's not what you're used to, I imagine, coming from Boston society. A shadow crossed Zara's face. What I'm used to and what I prefer are very different things, Mrs. Thompson. The cottage is charming and more than adequate for my needs. Margaret studied her thoughtfully. Running from something, are you? Zane tensed at the blunt question, but Zara met the older woman's gaze steadily. Yes, she admitted, but not from the law and not from responsibility. I'm running toward something, Mrs. Thompson, a life of my own choosing. The honesty of her answer seemed to satisfy Margaret, who nodded approvingly. Well, that's refreshing. Most don't admit it so plain. The wage is $30 a month plus room and board. You'll have Sundays for yourself and time each day for your own pursuits. We expect honesty, hard work, and respect. Give those and you'll receive the same in return. That's more than fair, Zara said, relief evident in her voice. When would you like me to start? No time like the present, Margaret declared. Zane, be a dear and show Miss Valentine to the cottage. After she's settled, you can acquaint her with the ranch grounds. Eli chuckled at his wife's efficient handling of the situation. Seems it's decided then. Welcome to Thompson's Reach, Miss Valentine. As Zane led Zara back to the cottage, he wondered at the swift turn of events. Yesterday, she had been a stranger in a restaurant. Today, she was to be his neighbor of sorts. The small, cautious part of him that had survived by avoiding entanglements warned that complications would surely follow. You don't have to show me around, Zara said as they approached the cottage. I'm sure you have more important work to do. Mrs. Thompson's instructions are pretty important around here, Zane replied with a slight smile. Besides, it's best you know where things are. Ranch can be dangerous if you're not familiar with it. Inside the cottage, Zara moved to the window, looking out at the view of distant mountains. It's peaceful here, she murmured, almost to herself. I haven't felt peaceful in a very long time. Something in her tone made Zane want to know more, to understand what had driven this educated, refined woman to flee across the country alone. But he reminded himself that her past was her business just as his was his own. I'll wait outside while you get settled, he said. Take your time. On the small porch, Zane leaned against the railing, his thoughts conflicted. There was something about Zara Valentine that stirred feelings he'd deliberately buried years ago, curiosity, protectiveness, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. The arrival of Hargrove complicated matters further. Men like that didn't give up easily, especially when their pride was at stake. Zane's instinct for self-preservation told him to maintain his distance, to keep his interactions with Zara professional and limited. His life had found a tolerable balance, work, occasional companionship when necessary, and the freedom to move on when the weight of connection became too heavy. Zara represented a potential disruption to that careful equilibrium. And yet, as she emerged from the cottage, her face brightened with a tentative hope he recognized all too well. Zane found himself wondering if some disruptions might be worth the risk they carried. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Zane with its ease. Zara adapted to ranch life with a determination that earned respect from everyone at Thompson's Reach. She proved adept at the bookkeeping, bringing order to accounts that had grown chaotic, and her presence seemed to lighten Margaret's spirits considerably. A week passed with no sign of Hargrove, though Zane remained wary. Each trip into town, he half expected to encounter the man, his instincts warning that the matter was far from resolved. But as days stretched into 2 weeks with no disruption, he found himself gradually relaxing into the new pattern of life at the ranch. Despite his initial intention to keep his distance, Zane found himself increasingly in Zara's company. It began with the daily rides Margaret suggested Zara take to familiarize herself with the property, rides that Eli insisted should be accompanied, for safety's sake. As the most available hand not occupied with the summer branding, the task fell to Zane. These rides became something he looked forward to more than he cared to admit. Zara was an able horsewoman, adapting quickly to Western riding styles, and her genuine interest in the land and its workings drew Zane out of his habitual reserve. "What's that plant?" she asked on one such ride, pointing to a purple-flowered shrub growing along the creek bank. "I've noticed it all along the water." "Wild sage," Zane replied, guiding his horse closer to the bank. "Good for flavoring, and the old Ute medicine woman who used to come through here claimed it warded off evil spirits." Zara smiled at that. "Did it work?" "Well, I haven't seen any evil spirits lately," he answered with a rare grin. "Could be the sage, could be they just don't care for the company out this way." Her laugh, bright and uninhibited, struck him as one of the most genuine sounds he'd heard in years. Zane found himself sharing more than he normally would, pointing out landmarks, explaining the seasonal patterns of the land, even telling stories of his early days learning to work cattle. In return, Zara spoke of Boston, the crowded streets and strict social hierarchies so different from the open spaces of Colorado. She described the shipping business, her forbidden education in navigation and commerce gained by eavesdropping on her father's meetings, and her mother's quiet rebellion in teaching her daughter to value her mind. "She wanted more for me," Zara explained one evening as they sat on the porch of her cottage, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and purple. "Not just a better marriage or more wealth, but a fuller life." She never said it directly, she couldn't, but I think she regretted her own choices. "Is that why you left?" Zane asked, breaking his silent rule against prying into her past. Zara was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Partly," she finally said. "After she died, Father became more insistent about the match with Maxwell. The wedding date was set, arrangements made. I was expected to simply comply." Her voice hardened. "Then I found letters, correspondence between my father and Maxwell's father, detailing the business merger that would follow the marriage. Terms, conditions, assets, including me, valued primarily for the Valenti shipping connections I would bring." Anger flickered across her features, visible in the fading light. "I was never consulted, never considered as anything but property to be transferred. When I confronted my father, he told me that a daughter's duty was to advance family interests, that personal feelings were irrelevant to the proper functioning of society." "So you left," Zane said, understanding in his tone. "So I left," she agreed. "I took my mother's jewelry, my small inheritance from my grandmother, and what cash I could gather. I planned to disappear completely, to start fresh where no one knew the Valenti name." "How did Hargrove find you?" A sigh escaped her. "I underestimated his resources and determination. He has connections across the country, business associates, former schoolmates. Someone recognized me in St. Louis and telegraphed him. By then, I had joined the wagon train heading west, hoping to lose myself in the migration." Zane processed this information, understanding better the tension he'd witnessed between them. "He won't give up easily." "No," she agreed, her voice growing quieter. "Maxwell considers me his rightful property. The embarrassment of my flight has only hardened his resolve." The protective instinct that had stirred in Zane from their first meeting grew stronger. "What will you do if he comes here?" Zara's chin lifted with determination. "Continue building the life I've chosen. I'm of legal age, unmarried, and free to determine my own path. He has no legal claim to me, whatever he might believe." Her courage impressed Zane, though he worried it might not be enough against a man of Hargrove's evident means and connections. Still, there was something in the set of her jaw, the quiet dignity of her rebellion, that made him believe she might succeed where others would falter. As twilight deepened into night, Zane reluctantly stood to leave. These evening conversations had become a habit over the past 2 weeks, one he knew he should break for his own protection, yet found himself unwilling to abandon. "Thank you for sharing your story," he said, unusually formal in his discomfort with the closeness that had developed between them. Zara smiled up at him, the last light catching in her green eyes. And thank you for listening, Zane. It means more than you know to speak freely without fear of judgment. Something in her gaze made his heart beat faster, a sensation so unfamiliar it almost felt like danger. Zane nodded awkwardly and stepped off the porch, turning toward the bunkhouse with a confused jumble of thoughts. He had spent years carefully avoiding attachments, convinced that the frontier was no place for tender emotions. That connections only led to loss and pain. Yet in just 2 weeks, Zara Valenti had somehow slipped past defenses he'd thought impenetrable, making him question certainties he'd lived by since his parents' deaths. As he walked through the quiet night, Zane told himself it was merely concern for a vulnerable woman in a difficult situation, that the warmth he felt in her presence was simply appreciation for intelligent conversation, that the way his thoughts increasingly turned to her throughout his days meant nothing significant. But in the honest darkness of the bunkhouse, as he lay listening to the other hand's quiet breathing, Zane admitted to himself what he'd been avoiding. Zara Valenti was becoming important to him. And that realization terrified him more than any stampede or gunfight ever had. The reckoning Zane had been expecting arrived on a clear morning in early July. He was in the far pasture with 2 other hands, repairing fence line damaged in a recent thunderstorm, when he saw a rider approaching at speed from the direction of the ranch house. Young Tommy Wilson, the newest hand at Thompson's Reach, pulled up his horse in a cloud of dust. "Zane, Mr. Thompson says you're needed back at the house right away. There's trouble." A cold certainty settled in Zane's gut. "What kind of trouble?" "Some fancy gentleman from back east showed up with the sheriff. They're asking for Miss Valenti." Tommy shifted nervously in his saddle. "Mr. Thompson said to tell you it's that Hargrove fellow." Zane was already mounting his horse. "Tell Jenkins I'll be back when I can," he called to the other hand as he turned his mount toward the ranch. He pushed his horse harder than was wise in the summer heat, covering the 3 miles back to the main house in record time. As he approached, he could see several horses and a fine carriage outside, clearly not local transportation. His jaw tightened as he dismounted, handing the reins to a hovering stable boy. Inside the main house, voices carried from the parlor, Eli's rumbling bass, Margaret's firm tones, and a cultured male voice that raised Zane's hackles immediately. He paused in the hallway, assessing the situation before entering. "Completely unacceptable," Hargrove was saying, his tone imperious. "She has obligations to fulfill, family responsibilities she has abandoned. Sheriff, surely you understand the seriousness of this situation." "What I understand, Mr. Hargrove," came Sheriff Taylor's measured response, "is that Miss Valenti appears to be a grown woman of legal age, employed in a respectable position. Unless there are charges against her, actual legal charges, my authority here is limited. Her father has declared her incompetent to manage her own affairs," Hargrove insisted. "I have documentation." "Documentation from Massachusetts holds no jurisdiction in Colorado territory," Margaret interrupted firmly. "And I can assure you, Mr. Hargrove, that Miss Valenti has demonstrated nothing but competence and good character since joining our household." Zane chose that moment to enter, removing his hat as he stepped into the parlor. All eyes turned to him, including those of Zara, who stood near the window, her face pale but composed. "Zane," Eli acknowledged with evident relief. "Good you're here." Hargrove's cold gaze swept over Zane's dust-covered clothing and sun-darkened skin, dismissal evident in his expression. "Another ranch hand. I fail to see how this is relevant to our discussion." "Mr. Finley is my most trusted employee," Eli stated flatly, "and he has a particular interest in ensuring the well-being of everyone at Thompson's Reach." Sheriff Taylor nodded to Zane in greeting. The 2 men had known each other for years and shared a mutual respect. "Finley." "Sheriff," Zane returned before turning his attention to Hargrove. The man looked even more out of place in the ranch house parlor than he had in the town restaurant, his expensive suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the practical furnishings. Beside him stood another man, equally well-dressed but more subdued, whom Zane guessed to be some kind of legal advisor. "Mr. Hargrove seems to think Miss Valenti should return east with him," Eli explained, his tone making clear his opinion on the matter. "Says he has paperwork declaring her unable to make her own decisions." Zane moved to stand near Zara, not touching her but positioning himself as a clear ally. She glanced at him gratefully, a silent communication passing between them. "Is that so?" Zane said, his voice deceptively calm. "Seems to me Miss Valenti's been making excellent decisions since arriving here." Hargrove's face flushed with barely controlled anger. "This is a private matter between Miss Valenti and her family. Your input is neither required nor appropriate, Cowboy." Maxwell, Zara spoke for the first time since Zane's arrival, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "I have made my position clear. I will not return to Boston, and I will not marry you. Whatever documents you've had my father sign are based on false premises and obtained through manipulation." "You're being childish, Zaraline," Hargrove replied, his tone shifting to one of condescending patience. "This rebellious adventure has gone on long enough. Your father is ill with worry, your position in society compromised. It's time to return to your responsibilities." "My responsibility is to my own conscience and future," Zara countered, moving away from the window to stand more centrally in the room. "I am 22 years old, of sound mind and legally independent. I have secured respectable employment and conduct myself with propriety. There are no grounds, legal or moral, for forcing my return." The sheriff cleared his throat. "She's right about the legal part, Mr. Hargrove. Massachusetts declarations don't carry weight here, especially without evidence of actual incapacity. Miss Valenti seems perfectly capable to me." Hargrove's lawyer stepped forward, producing more documents from his case. "We anticipated this position, Sheriff. We have also obtained a warrant for Miss Valenti's arrest on charges of theft." "Theft?" Margaret exclaimed incredulously. "That's absurd." The lawyer continued smoothly. "Miss Valenti removed valuable jewelry and cash from her father's home before her departure, property legally belonging to the Valenti estate." Zara's composure faltered for the first time. "That jewelry belonged to my mother. She explicitly left it to me in her will. And the money was my inheritance from my grandmother, held in trust until my 21st birthday, which passed last year." "Your father contests that interpretation," the lawyer replied. "As executor of both estates, he has legal authority to determine distribution of assets." Sheriff Taylor accepted the documents, reviewing them with a furrowed brow. "These appear to be in order, but—" he looked up at Zara. "Do you have documentation of your claim to these items? Copies of the wills, perhaps?" The fleeting hope in Zara's eyes dimmed. "No, everything was in my father's study. I never imagined he would resort to this." A heavy silence fell over the room. Zane could see the calculation in Hargrove's eyes, the satisfaction of a man who believed he had won. The thought of Zara being forced to return with this man, to be trapped in a marriage she didn't want, made something fierce and protective rise in Zane's chest. "Sheriff," he said carefully, "even if these charges have merit, wouldn't Miss Valenti need to be tried where the alleged crime occurred? You don't have authority to transport her back to Massachusetts." Sheriff Taylor nodded slowly. "That's true enough. The most I could do is detain her until proper extradition is arranged." He looked uncomfortable with the prospect. "Which could take considerable time, given the distance and jurisdictional complications." Hargrove's smug expression faltered slightly. "Surely you're not refusing to execute a valid warrant, Sheriff." "I'm considering the proper procedure," Taylor replied evenly. "And the proportional response to the situation. We're talking about family heirlooms that Miss Valenti may have legitimate claim to, not armed robbery." "The principle is the same," Hargrove insisted. "Theft is theft." Zane watched as Zara straightened her shoulders, a new resolve entering her expression. "If return of the items would resolve this matter, I am willing to comply. I brought my mother's jewelry because of its sentimental value, not its monetary worth. I would rather surrender it than be forced back to Boston." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "The charges would still stand. Your father requires your presence to resolve the matter fully." "I suspected as much," Zara replied coolly. "This has nothing to do with jewelry and everything to do with controlling my future." Eli, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "Sheriff, may I have a word with you privately, and perhaps Mr. Hargrove's legal representative as well?" Taylor nodded, and the three men stepped out into the hallway, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the parlor. Hargrove moved closer to Zara, his voice dropping to a level meant only for her ears, but in the quiet room his words carried clearly. "You're embarrassing yourself, Zaraline, playing at independence among these rustics." What do you imagine will become of you here, a ranch hand's wife, a frontier schoolmarm? How long before you're desperate to return to civilization, to proper society? Zane saw the flicker of uncertainty in Zara's eyes, the momentary doubt Hargrove's words had planted. He stepped forward, unable to remain silent. Seems to me Miss Valenti's found something worth more than your proper society, he said, his quiet voice carrying a dangerous edge. Freedom to choose her own path. Respect for her abilities, people who value her for more than family connections. Hargrove turned, his face contemptuous. And what would you know of value, cowboy? Men like you drift with the seasons, owning nothing, building nothing. At least in Boston, Zaraline would have position, security, and the life she was raised for. A cage is still a cage, no matter how gilded, Zara said, finding her voice again. I would rather face uncertainty as a free woman than certainty as a possession. Margaret, who had been watching the exchange with sharp eyes, moved to stand beside Zara. Well said, my dear, and you're hardly facing uncertainty alone. You have a place here for as long as you wish it. The solidarity between the women was evident, and Zane felt a surge of gratitude toward Margaret Thompson. Before Hargrove could respond, Eli returned with the sheriff and the lawyer, all three men looking grave but determined. We've reached a potential solution, Eli announced. Sheriff Taylor has agreed that, given the complex nature of the situation and Miss Valenti's established position here, immediate arrest would be excessive. Instead, Mr. Hargrove's representative will return to Boston with affidavits from myself, Mrs. Thompson, and the sheriff regarding Miss Valenti's current circumstances and character. The court can then determine whether continued pursuit of these charges is warranted. The lawyer nodded, though he looked less than pleased, with the understanding that Miss Valenti will not attempt to leave the territory while this matter is pending. That seems reasonable, Zara agreed, visible relief in her expression. Hargrove's face darkened with fury. This is outrageous. Sheriff, I demand you execute the warrant as written. Mr. Hargrove, Taylor said firmly, I've made my decision based on my best judgment and understanding of the law. Miss Valenti will remain here under the supervision of the Thompsons until this matter is properly resolved through legal channels. If you have objections, you're welcome to raise them with the territorial judge when he makes his circuit next month. The finality in the sheriff's tone made it clear further argument would be futile. Hargrove's jaw clenched, his eyes cold with barely contained rage as they fixed on Zara. This isn't over, he said quietly. Your little frontier adventure is merely postponed, not permitted. Your father and I will see to that. With those parting words, he stormed from the room, his lawyer following after an apologetic nod to the sheriff. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, followed by the clatter of carriage wheels as Hargrove departed. A collective breath seemed to release from everyone remaining. Zara sank into the nearest chair, the strain of the confrontation finally showing in her trembling hands. Thank you, she said, looking up at Sheriff Taylor. I know you took a risk interpreting the law as you did. The sheriff shrugged, replacing his hat. Law's meant to protect people, not control them. Besides, I've known Eli and Margaret too long to believe they'd harbor someone of poor character. He nodded to the group. I'll be heading back to town now. Miss Valenti, remember you're to stay within the territory until this matter's resolved. After the sheriff departed, Eli placed a comforting hand on Zara's shoulder. Don't you worry about Hargrove. His kind make a lot of noise, but they rarely have the stomach for a prolonged fight, especially out here where their money doesn't guarantee the outcome. I hope you're right, Zara replied, though worry still clouded her eyes. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to your home. Nonsense, Margaret declared firmly. If anything, I admire your courage all the more. Not many would stand their ground against such pressure. Zara smiled gratefully at the older woman, then turned to Zane, who had remained quietly vigilant throughout the exchange. And thank you, Zane, for coming so quickly. Your presence was reassuring. Something in the way she looked at him made Zane's carefully maintained defenses waver. The urge to protect her had overwhelmed his usual caution, revealing feelings he hadn't intended to develop. Anyone at Thompson's Reach would have done the same, he said, retreating behind practicality. Eli exchanged a knowing glance with his wife. Margaret, I believe we have some correspondence to attend to in the study. Zane, perhaps you could escort Miss Valenti back to her cottage. She's had quite a morning and could use some fresh air. The transparent attempt to give them privacy might have amused Zane under different circumstances. As it was, he simply nodded, offering his arm to Zara as the Thompsons tactfully withdrew. Outside, the July sun beat down on the ranch yard, the ordinary activities of the hands continuing as if the morning's drama had never occurred. Zane and Zara walked in silence toward her cottage, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between them. At her door, Zara paused, turning to face him directly. "He'll be back," she said quietly. "Maxwell doesn't accept defeat, especially not at the hands of people he considers beneath him." "We'll be ready," Zane replied, though he's slipping out before he could catch it. Zara's gaze searched his face. "Why are you helping me, Zane? You've made it clear you prefer to avoid entanglements, yet here you are, repeatedly involving yourself in my problems." The directness of her question caught him off guard. Zane looked away, struggling to articulate feelings he barely understood himself. "I respect your choice," he finally said, "to leave everything familiar for something uncertain but true to yourself. Not many have that kind of courage." "Is that all?" she pressed gently. Zane met her eyes then, knowing his expression probably revealed more than his words. "No," he admitted, "that's not all. But I'm not sure what the rest means yet." A soft smile touched her lips. "Neither am I, but I'm glad you're here while we figure it out." The simple honesty of her response disarmed him completely. For a moment, Zane allowed himself to imagine possibilities he'd long since dismissed. A life not defined by solitude and distance, but by connection and shared purpose. "I should get back to the fence line," he said finally, reluctant to leave yet wary of the unfamiliar territory they were approaching. "Will you be all right?" "Yes," Zara assured him. "I have accounts to review for Margaret, and honestly, work will be a welcome distraction." Zane nodded, stepping back. "I'll check on you this evening." As he walked away, Zane knew something fundamental had shifted between them, and within him. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart had developed cracks, allowing feelings he'd long suppressed to seep through. The question now was whether he would have the courage to let those walls fall completely, or if the habits of self-preservation would ultimately prevail. Summer stretched into its fullness, bringing long days of intense heat and brief, violent thunderstorms that swept across the plains like divine tantrums. July passed into August with no further word from Hargrove, though his threat lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon of Zara's newfound peace. Despite this uncertainty, or perhaps because of it, life at Thompson's Reach settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Zara's competence with the ranch accounts freed Margaret from worry, while her willingness to learn other aspects of frontier life, from preserving summer fruits to basic medical care, made her an invaluable addition to the household. For Zane, the summer became a time of internal reckoning. The walls he had so carefully maintained for years were crumbling faster than he could rebuild them. Each evening conversation on Zara's porch, each shared ride across the ranch lands, each moment of quiet understanding that passed between them pulled him further from the solitude he had once believed essential to survival. On a particularly still August evening, with heat lightning playing along the distant mountains, they sat side by side on the cottage porch. The day's work was done, the ranch settling into night's quietude. These moments had become precious to them both, a pause between duties where conversation could unfold without pressure or purpose. "I had a letter from my friend Clara in Boston today," Zara said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She writes that my father has been telling everyone I've had some kind of nervous collapse and am recuperating at a private sanitarium in Switzerland." Zane raised an eyebrow. "Switzerland?" Apparently, Zara's laugh held more weariness than humor. "It's more acceptable than admitting his daughter fled an arranged marriage to seek independence in the West. Clara says Maxwell maintains the fiction publicly, but has confided to close associates that he's handling the situation. Has there been any official word about the theft charges?" She shook her head, "Nothing through proper channels. Sheriff Taylor checks each week when the mail coach arrives, but so far silence. I'm beginning to think it was merely a tactic to pressure me into returning immediately." "Or they're building a stronger case," Zane suggested cautiously. "Perhaps," Zara sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be free of them, if I'll spend my life looking over my shoulder for Maxwell or my father's agents." The vulnerability in her voice stirred Zane's protective instincts, but also his deepest fears. Her situation highlighted the very reasons he had avoided attachment for so long: the complications, the vulnerability to forces beyond control, the potential for loss. "What would you do?" he asked quietly. If you could be certain they would never find you. Zara considered the question seriously, her gaze fixed on the distant lightning. Build a life that's truly mine. Continue working, perhaps eventually start a small business of my own. In Boston, I was always defined by my relation to men, daughter of, fiancé of. Here, I'm beginning to discover who I am apart from those connections. She turned to look at him directly. What about you, Zane? If you weren't constrained by the past, what would you choose? The question pierced through his defenses. No one had asked him about his desires in years. He had become so practiced at living day to day, movement to movement, that the concept of choosing a future felt almost foreign. I've never thought much beyond the next season, he admitted. Always figured I'd keep working cattle, moving when it felt necessary. And now, Zara pressed gently. Zane was silent for a long moment, the truth he'd been avoiding rising to the surface. Now I find myself thinking about staying, he finally said, the words feeling like a confession, about building something lasting. The admission hung between them, its implications clear to them both. Zara's hand moved across the space separating their chairs, coming to rest lightly on his arm. I'm glad, she said simply. Before Zane could respond, a rider appeared at the edge of the ranch yard, approaching at a gallop despite the fading light. Instinctively, Zane rose, moving to position himself between Zara and potential danger. As the rider drew closer, Zane recognized Tommy Wilson, returning from his weekly trip to town for mail and supplies. The young cowhand pulled up sharply in front of the cottage, his face flushed with exertion. Zane, Miss Valenti, thank goodness you're both here. He thrust forward a telegram. This came for Mr. Thompson, but he said to bring it straight to you. It's from the sheriff. Zane took the paper, unfolding it with a sense of foreboding. Zara moved to his side, reading over his shoulder in the dim light from the cottage window. HARGROVE with Eastern Lawman Stop Extradition Order signed by Territorial Judge Harrison Stop, coming tomorrow to execute Stop, advise preparation Stop Sheriff Taylor. The implications were immediate and alarming. Judge Harrison was known to favor Eastern business interests and had been appointed through political connections rather than frontier experience. If he had signed an extradition order without waiting for the territorial circuit judge, Hargrove must have leveraged significant influence. He's really doing it, Zara whispered, her face pale in the gathering darkness. He's having me arrested and forced back to Boston. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. There's more. Mr. Thompson sent word to expect him shortly. He rode into town earlier today for supplies and heard the news firsthand. As if summoned by the mention, Eli Thompson appeared on the main house porch, his figure silhouetted against the lamplight behind him. He raised a hand, beckoning them to join him. Thank you, Tommy, Zane said, already moving toward the main house with Zara beside him. Put up your horse and get some supper. Inside, they found both Eli and Margaret waiting in the study, their expressions grave. A map of the territory lay open on the desk, several routes marked with Eli's characteristic precision. You've seen the telegram, Eli said as they entered. It wasn't a question. Zane nodded. How did Hargrove manage to get the order signed so quickly? The circuit judge isn't due for weeks. Money talks, Eli replied grimly. And Harrison owes his appointment to Eastern interests with connections to the Hargrove family. According to Sheriff Taylor, the paperwork looks legitimate enough. Theft charges expanded to include embezzlement, with affidavits from Valenti employees claiming Zara had access to company funds before her departure. That's absurd, Zara exclaimed. I never touched the company accounts. Whether it's true doesn't matter at this point, Margaret said gently. The order has been signed. Sheriff Taylor will be legally obligated to execute it, regardless of his personal feelings on the matter. A heavy silence fell over the room as the reality of the situation sank in. Zara's hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I won't go back, she said firmly. I can't, not to be forced into marriage with Maxwell, not to live under my father's control again. I would rather, she trailed off, the unspoken alternatives hanging in the air. Eli and Margaret exchanged a look that spoke of a decision already reached. Eli turned back to the map, his finger tracing a route heading southwest. There's another option, he said carefully. Sheriff Taylor will be here tomorrow officially to execute the order. Unofficially, he's giving us warning and time to act. He looked up, meeting Zara's eyes directly. You could leave tonight. Head for New Mexico territory. I have connections in Santa Fe who could help you establish a new identity, start fresh where Hargrove's influence doesn't reach. The shock of the suggestion rendered Zara momentarily speechless. Zane felt a cold weight settle in his chest at the thought of her disappearing into the night, perhaps never to return. You would help me flee? Zara finally asked, disbelief evident in her voice. Risk your reputation, your standing in the community. Margaret moved to take Zara's hands in her own. My dear, in the months you've been with us, you've become like family. We would not see you forced back into a life that would destroy your spirit. Tears welled in Zara's eyes at the older woman's words. I don't know what to say, your kindness is practical as well as kind, Eli interrupted gruffly, though affection warmed his tone. You're the best bookkeeper we've had, and Margaret's health has improved considerably with your assistance. Self-interest, you might say. The attempt at lightness eased the tension momentarily, but the gravity of the decision at hand quickly reasserted itself. Zara looked from the Thompsons to Zane, her expression conflicted. If I run now, I'll never stop running, she said quietly. They'll always be searching, always a step behind. Is that really freedom? The question hung in the air, unanswerable yet essential. Zane found himself torn between the desire to see her safe and the knowledge that a life in hiding carried its own kind of imprisonment. There is another possibility, he said slowly, an idea forming that was either the most foolish or the most important of his life. One that might give you legal protection Hargrove couldn't easily overcome. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him expectantly. Zane took a deep breath, committing to a path he had never imagined for himself. Marriage, he stated simply. As a married woman, your legal identity would merge with your husband's. The charges against Zara Valenti would become significantly more complicated to pursue if she were legally Zara Finley. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Margaret's soft gasp. Eli's bushy eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, while Zara's expression transformed from confusion to dawning comprehension. A marriage of convenience, she said slowly, testing the concept. To protect me legally. Yes, Zane confirmed, though something in him rebelled against the clinical description of what he was proposing. It would need to happen tonight, before the sheriff arrives tomorrow. Reverend Davies in town would perform the ceremony without questions if Eli vouched for the urgency. Eli was already nodding thoughtfully. It could work. Maxwell would have no legal right to compel a married woman to return with him, especially against her will and her husband's. The territory recognizes the husband's authority over the wife, not the father's once she's married. Trading one man's control for another's, Zara observed, a note of bitterness in her voice. Zane met her gaze directly, not if the husband has no interest in controlling his wife. Not if the arrangement includes complete freedom for you to live as you choose, with the legal protection of the marriage only. The implications of what he was suggesting, a marriage in name only, a legal shield with no personal claims, hung between them. It was both more and less than what had been growing between them over the summer months, and Zane felt the weight of potential misunderstanding. You would do that? Zara asked quietly. Tie yourself to me legally, limit your own freedom, just to help me escape Hargrove. The question demanded complete honesty. Zane was aware of the Thompsons watching, but he focused only on Zara, allowing her to see what he had been carefully guarding. Yes, he said simply, I would. Margaret cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps Eli and I should give you two a moment to discuss this privately. It's rather a significant decision after all. Eli looked reluctant to leave what was proving to be the most dramatic evening at Thompson's Reach in years, but he nodded in agreement. We'll be in the kitchen when you've reached a decision. If we're riding into town tonight, we'll need to prepare. As the door closed behind the Thompsons, Zane and Zara faced each other in a silence heavy with unspoken feelings and possibilities. The proposal hung between them, practical in its conception but profound in its implications. You don't have to do this, Zara finally said. I could still try for New Mexico, take my chances on the road. You could, Zane agreed. But the journey would be dangerous, especially for a woman alone. And even if you reached Santa Fe safely, you'd be forever looking over your shoulder, never able to fully build the life you want. And marriage to you would be different. There was no challenge in her tone, only genuine questioning. Zane considered his answer carefully. It would give you legal protection while you decide what you truly want. If that eventually means dissolution of the marriage and a journey elsewhere, so be it. If it means staying and building something here, he hesitated. Well, that would be your choice as well. But what do you want, Zane? Zara pressed, stepping closer to him. You've spent years avoiding exactly this kind of permanent connection. Why offer it now? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty in return. Zane found himself at a crossroads: continue the habits of emotional distance that had protected him for so long, or risk the truth that had been growing increasingly undeniable. Because you make me question everything I thought I knew, he admitted, the words feeling like stepping into unknown territory. The boundaries I've built, the distance I've maintained, it all made sense until you arrived and made me wonder what I've been protecting myself from. And what answer did you find? Zara asked softly. That maybe I've been hiding from life itself, that surviving isn't the same as living. Zane took a deep breath. I'm not offering this marriage only to protect you, Zara. I'm offering it because the thought of you leaving, of returning to my life as it was before you, feels like losing something I never knew I wanted until now. The vulnerability of the confession left him feeling exposed, uncertain. For a man who had spent years carefully guarding his emotions, the admission was more terrifying than any physical danger he'd faced. Zara's eyes searched his face, seeming to look beyond the words to the feelings beneath them. Is this a proposal of convenience or of the heart, Zane Finley? Maybe it started as one and became the other, he replied honestly. I don't have pretty words or grand gestures. All I know is that when I picture my future now, you're in it. And I'll do whatever necessary to make that possible, even if it means stepping into something I never thought I'd want. A smile slowly spread across Zara's face, lighting her eyes with a warmth that reached something long dormant in Zane's heart. She closed the remaining distance between them, her hand coming to rest against his cheek in a touch so gentle it almost undid him. Then yes, she said simply, I accept your proposal, both the practical protection it offers and the possibility of something more meaningful between us. Relief and something deeper flooded through Zane. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to act on impulse, gathering Zara into his arms. She came willingly, her body fitting against his as if designed for that purpose. For a moment they simply held each other, the decision made bringing with it a strange peace amidst the urgency of their circumstances. When Zane finally released her, it was only far enough to look into her eyes. We should tell the Thompsons. If we're riding into town tonight, we need to move quickly. Zara nodded, though she made no move to step away from him. Zane, she said hesitantly, before we do this, I need you to know something. The seriousness in her tone made him tense slightly. What is it? Whatever began this, necessity, protection, circumstance, what I feel for you is real. Her eyes held his steadily. I don't want you to think I'm accepting only for legal safety. I'm accepting because in these months at Thompson's Reach, you've become important to me in ways I never expected. The simple honesty of her declaration touched something deep in Zane's heart. Without thinking, he leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with the intensity of feelings long held in check. Zara's arms wound around his neck, her response erasing any doubt that might have lingered about the nature of their connection. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers. I reckon we should tell the Thompsons our decision, he murmured, reluctant to break the moment but aware of the urgency of their situation. I reckon we should, Zara agreed, a smile in her voice at the adopted Western phrasing. Hand in hand, they made their way to the kitchen, where Eli and Margaret were pretending to be occupied with mundane tasks while obviously waiting for their return. The older couple looked up expectantly as they entered. We've decided, Zane announced simply. If Reverend Davies is willing, we'd like to be married tonight. The joy that spread across Margaret's face was matched by Eli's broad grin. Well now, the rancher said, clapping his hands together, I'd say this calls for a bit of celebration along with our preparations. Margaret, where's that bottle of good whiskey we've been saving? As the Thompsons bustled about, pouring small glasses of amber liquid and offering enthusiastic congratulations, Zane kept his hand firmly around Zara's. The decision had been made, the course set. Whatever came tomorrow with the sheriff and Hargrove, they would face it together, no longer as two solitary souls seeking safety, but as partners bound by both law and a deeper connection neither had been looking for. The ride into Cottonwood Springs under the cover of darkness was tense but determined. Eli led the way, with Zane and Zara following closely, and Margaret remaining at the ranch to maintain normalcy should anyone come looking earlier than expected. They kept to less traveled paths, avoiding the main road where they might encounter others, particularly anyone connected to Hargrove. Cottonwood Springs was mostly quiet when they arrived, the saloon the only establishment still showing bright lights and activity. Eli guided them to the modest white church at the edge of town, where a single lamp burned in the attached living quarters. Reverend Davies, a kind-faced man in his 60s who had been one of the town's founding residents, answered Eli's knock with surprise that quickly turned to understanding as the situation was explained. He ushered them inside without hesitation. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he said thoughtfully after hearing their request, "not to be entered into lightly or for frivolous reasons. But protection of the vulnerable has always been among the highest callings." He looked between Zane and Zara with perceptive eyes, "And I sense there is more between you than merely practical considerations." "There is," Zane confirmed, his hand finding Zara's. "The circumstances may have forced the timing, but the feeling is genuine." The Reverend nodded, satisfied. "Then let us proceed. My wife will serve as one witness and Eli as the other. Though I must say," he added with a gentle smile, "this is the first wedding I've performed in the middle of the night since the Anderson boy rode in with his sweetheart during the blizzard of '65. In the small church, lit only by a few hastily placed lanterns, Zara and Zane stood before Reverend Davies. There had been no time for special clothes or traditional preparations, but as Zane looked at Zara in the soft lantern light, her face composed and determined, he thought she had never looked more beautiful. The ceremony was brief but dignified, the Reverend's words carrying the weight of tradition despite the unusual circumstances. When it came time for the vows, Zane found his voice steady, the commitment he was making feeling right in a way he hadn't anticipated. "I, Zane Finley, take you, Zara Valenti, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he recited, looking directly into her eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Zara's voice was clear and unwavering as she repeated the same vows, her green eyes never leaving his. The simple gold bands Eli had somehow procured, likely from the general store owner roused from his bed, felt significant as they exchanged them, symbols of a commitment that had begun in necessity but transformed into something deeper. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado and Almighty God," Reverend Davies pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The kiss that sealed their vows was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying the genuine emotion that had grown between them. As they signed the marriage certificate, a document that would transform Zara's legal identity and provide the protection they sought, Zane felt a strange mix of disbelief and certainty. After years of avoiding permanent connections, he had just made the most binding commitment possible, and yet it felt right in a way he couldn't have imagined. "Congratulations, Mrs. Finley," Eli said with a grin as they exited the church, the signed and witnessed certificate safely stored in Zane's jacket. "Though I suspect this isn't quite the wedding celebration you imagined as a girl." Zara smiled, her hand firmly in Zane's. "Actually, it's perfect, simple, honest, and undertaken for the right reasons. I couldn't ask for more." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey in, a contemplative silence falling over the group. The reality of what they had done, and what lay ahead when the sheriff arrived in the morning, weighed on their minds, tempering the satisfaction of having secured Zara's legal protection. At the ranch, Margaret was waiting anxiously on the porch despite the late hour. Her face broke into a wide smile at the sight of them returning safely. "Well," she demanded as they dismounted. "Is it done?" Eli nodded, helping his wife down the porch steps to greet them. "May I present Mr. and Mrs. Finley, legally wed and properly documented." Margaret embraced Zara warmly, then surprised Zane by giving him an equally affectionate hug. "I couldn't be happier," she declared. "Though I do wish we could have had a proper celebration." "There will be time for that later," Eli reminded her gently. "For now, we need to prepare for tomorrow's confrontation. Zane, you and Zara should take the main guest room in the house tonight. Better to present a united front when the sheriff arrives." The suggestion brought a flush to Zara's cheeks and an unexpected awkwardness between the newlyweds. Despite the genuine feelings that had developed between them, the abrupt transition from independent individuals to married couple left little time for adjustment. "Of course," Zane agreed, aware of Zara's momentary discomfort. "Whatever strengthens our position." Inside the house, Margaret showed them to the rarely used guest room, a comfortable space with a large four-poster bed and adjoining washroom. "I've had fresh linens put on the bed and there's water for washing," she said practically. "Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will require clear heads and steady nerves." When they were finally alone, a strange shyness fell between Zane and Zara. For all the closeness that had developed over their months together, this new intimacy, standing in a bedroom as husband and wife, was uncharted territory. "I'll sleep in the chair," Zane offered, gesturing to the upholstered armchair near the window. "You take the bed." Zara looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and something more complex. "That's not necessary. The bed is plenty large enough for both of us." At his hesitation, she added, "We're married now, Zane. Even if we're still finding our way and what that means." The simple practicality of her statement eased the tension. Zane nodded, removing his jacket and hanging it carefully over the back of the chair. The marriage certificate crinkled in the pocket, a tangible reminder of the commitment they had made. "It's strange," Zara said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "A few months ago I was fleeing a marriage I didn't want, and now I've entered one of my own choosing with a man I barely knew then." "Do you regret it?" Zane asked, the question more vulnerable than he intended. Zara looked up at him, her expression open and honest. "No, it may have happened faster than either of us expected, but I don't regret it, do you?" Zane moved to sit beside her on the bed, taking her hand in his. "No." For a man who spent years avoiding permanence, that probably sounds strange. But it feels right in a way I didn't think was possible. The sincerity in his voice brought a soft smile to Zara's face. She leaned toward him, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. "Then we'll figure out the rest as we go." Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative in this new context, but it quickly deepened with the emotional intensity of the day. Zane's arms went around her, drawing her closer as months of growing feeling found expression in this moment of privacy. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest," he murmured reluctantly. "Tomorrow won't be easy." Zara nodded, though she made no move to release him. "Stay close," she whispered. "Just hold me tonight." They settled into the bed fully clothed, too emotionally and physically exhausted for anything more, yet finding profound comfort in the simple act of holding each other as sleep gradually claimed them. Whatever challenges awaited with the morning light, they would face them not as isolated individuals, but as partners bound by both law and deepening affection. Dawn broke clear and bright, the summer sun cresting the eastern plains with deceptive cheerfulness, given the confrontation the day would bring. Zane woke first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the warm presence beside him. Zara was still sleeping, her face peaceful in repose, dark hair spread across the pillow. The sight stirred something protective and tender in him, emotions Zane had deliberately avoided for years now flowing freely. His wife. The thought was still strange, the word foreign on his tongue, yet it felt increasingly right with each passing hour. Careful not to wake her, Zane slipped from the bed and moved to the window. The ranch was already active, hands going about their morning chores with no awareness of the drama about to unfold. In the distance he could see Eli by the corral, likely giving instructions for the day's work to compensate for Zane's absence. Behind him he heard Zara stirring. "What time is it?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. "Just past 6, Zane replied, turning from the window. "Sheriff usually makes his rounds after breakfast. We've got time yet." Zara sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress. Despite the circumstances, she looked remarkably composed, her natural dignity asserting itself even after a night of restless sleep. "We should prepare, decide how to present our marriage, what to say to Hargrove." Zane nodded, moving to retrieve his jacket with the precious certificate. "The legal facts are on our side. You're no longer Zara Valenti but Zara Finley, my lawful wife. The theft charges become complicated when the accused has changed legal identity." "Maxwell won't accept that easily," Zara warned, standing to straighten her appearance as best she could. "He'll claim the marriage is a sham, arranged solely to evade justice." "Let him," Zane said firmly. "Marriages happen quickly out here all the time. No one will question why a respectable young woman working on the ranch would marry one of the hands after a suitable acquaintance." Zara smiled slightly at his description. "Is that our story then, a whirlwind frontier romance?" "Is it so far from the truth?" Zane asked quietly. Their eyes met across the room, the question hanging between them. After a moment, Zara shook her head. No, she admitted. Perhaps not so far at all. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Margaret's voice called through the wood, "Breakfast is ready when you are." Eli's seen riders approaching from town, looks like the sheriff and others. The reminder of the imminent confrontation sobered them both. Zane moved to Zara's side, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he said quietly. "I meant those vows last night, Zara, all of them." Emotion welled in her green eyes. "As did I," she squeezed his hands firmly. "Let's go meet them as Mr. and Mrs. Finley then." After a hasty breakfast they barely tasted, Zane and Zara joined Eli and Margaret on the front porch. In the distance, a cloud of dust signaled the approaching riders, more than just the sheriff, by the look of it. Zane felt Zara tense beside him and reached for her hand, a public declaration of their unity. As the riders drew closer, they could make out Sheriff Taylor at the lead, his expression grim but determined. Beside him rode Hargrove, impeccably dressed despite the dust of travel, his face set in lines of cold fury. Behind them came Hargrove's lawyer and another man Zane didn't recognize, presumably the Eastern lawman mentioned in the telegram. "Quite the welcoming committee," Eli muttered as the riders approached. "Stand your ground. We've done nothing wrong." The horses pulled up in the yard, their riders dismounting with varying degrees of grace. Sheriff Taylor approached first, his hat in his hands, obvious discomfort in his bearing. "Morning, Eli, Margaret," he greeted, nodding to each in turn before his gaze settled on Zane and Zara. "Mr. Finley, Miss Valenti." "Mrs. Finley," Zane corrected firmly, producing the marriage certificate from his jacket. "As of last night, legally wed by Reverend Davies in Cottonwood Springs, with all proper documentation." The sheriff's eyebrows rose in surprise, though a flicker of what might have been approval crossed his weathered face. "Is that so? Congratulations are in order, then." Hargrove pushed forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is preposterous, an obvious attempt to circumvent justice. Sheriff, you cannot possibly recognize this sham arrangement." "Now see here," Eli began, bristling at the insult to his friends. Sheriff Taylor raised a hand for calm. "The certificate appears to be in order, signed by Reverend Davies, whom I know to be particular about performing legitimate unions. Mr. Hargrove, I understand your frustration, but the legal situation has changed significantly." The Eastern lawman stepped forward, a tall man with the hard eyes of someone accustomed to authority. "I am Marshal James Blackwood, federal jurisdiction. I have orders to escort Miss Valenti back to Massachusetts to face charges of theft and embezzlement." "Mrs. Finley," Zara corrected calmly, though Zane could feel the tension in her hand. "And I believe your jurisdiction is complicated by my change in legal status, Marshal." Hargrove's lawyer cleared his throat importantly. "A marriage clearly entered into for the sole purpose of evading justice can be set aside. The timing alone suggests fraudulent intent." "Suggests but doesn't prove," Sheriff Taylor countered. "Rapid marriages are common in the territory, particularly when, as in this case, the couple has known each other for several months and lived in proximity." Hargrove's face darkened further. "Zaraline, this charade is beneath you. Whatever this, Cowboy has promised you, whatever romantic notions you've indulged, the reality of your situation remains unchanged. You are wanted for serious crimes in Massachusetts. Your father is gravely concerned for your welfare." "My father is concerned for his business interests," Zara replied evenly. "And I am no longer accountable to him, but to my husband and myself. The jewelry I took belonged to my mother and was explicitly left to me in her will." "I have stolen nothing." "The courts in Boston will determine that," Marshal Blackwood stated flatly. "My orders are clear." Zane stepped forward, his stance protective without being aggressive. "Your orders were to apprehend Zara Valenti. That person no longer exists legally. My wife is under my protection, as the law recognizes." The standoff was tense, neither side willing to concede. Finally, Sheriff Taylor sighed heavily. "Marshal, Mr. Hargrove, I suggest we discuss this situation more privately. The legal complexities deserve careful consideration." He turned to Eli. "Might we use your study?" Eli nodded reluctantly, clearly unhappy about having Hargrove in his home, but seeing the wisdom in moving the confrontation away from the increasingly curious ranch hands who had begun to gather at a distance. Inside, the tension seemed to concentrate in the confined space of Eli's study. Zane kept Zara close by his side, a united front against the hostile stares of Hargrove and the marshal. "Let's be clear about the facts," Sheriff Taylor began, assuming control of the discussion. "I have been presented with an extradition order for Zara Valenti on charges of theft and embezzlement. However, I have also been presented with a valid marriage certificate showing that as of last night, Zara Valenti legally became Zara Finley, wife of Zane Finley, a respected resident of this territory." "A transparent evasion," Hargrove's lawyer insisted. "The court will not recognize a marriage entered into for such obvious purposes." "What evidence do you have of our motives?" Zane challenged. "Zara and I have known each other for months. We've worked together, spent time together daily. Ask anyone at Thompson's Reach. Our growing attachment has been obvious to all." Eli nodded in confirmation. "It's true. Margaret and I have watched the relationship develop since Miss Valenti, Mrs. Finley, arrived in June. The marriage may have happened quickly, but it surprised no one who knew them." Hargrove, who had been seething in silence, suddenly addressed Zara directly. "Is this truly what you want, Zaraline? To throw away everything, your family, your position, your future, for life as a cowhand's wife in this wilderness? To live in dirt and deprivation when you could have luxury and respect in Boston?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Zara's face. Not, Zane realized, about her choice to marry him, but about confronting the stark contrast between the life she had known and the one she had chosen. It was a momentary hesitation, quickly replaced by determination, but Zane felt its significance. "What I want," Zara replied steadily, "is the freedom to determine my own path, to build a life based on genuine connection rather than business arrangement, to be valued for my mind and character rather than my family name." She straightened, her dignity palpable. "Yes, Maxwell, this is precisely what I want." The conviction in her voice seemed to reach even Marshal Blackwood, whose expression softened slightly. "Sheriff Taylor is correct about the legal complications. A married woman's legal identity becomes substantially intertwined with her husband's. The extradition order is specifically for Zara Valenti, an unmarried woman under her father's legal authority." Hargrove's lawyer protested immediately. "The marriage can be annulled or set aside given the clear intent to evade justice. We simply need to return to Boston with Mrs. Finley, where the courts can sort out both the original charges and the validity of this convenient union." "I'm not going to Boston," Zara stated flatly. "I am legally married, of sound mind, and under no legal compulsion to travel thousands of miles to face charges that are transparently false." Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. "There is a legal compromise available. The charges could be addressed here, in the territorial court, when the circuit judge arrives next month. Mr. Valenti or his representatives would present their evidence, Mrs. Finley would present her defense, and the matter would be resolved according to law." The suggestion hung in the air, a potential resolution that would allow both sides to maintain their positions while adhering to legal process. Marshal Blackwood seemed to consider it seriously, but Hargrove's expression made it clear he found the proposal unacceptable. "Absolutely not," he snapped. "The alleged crimes occurred in Massachusetts under Massachusetts law. The case will be heard there or not at all." "Then perhaps not at all is the answer," Sheriff Taylor replied evenly. "Because I cannot in good conscience forcibly remove a married woman from her husband's protection based on an extradition order for a legal identity that no longer exists." The impasse was clear. For a tense moment, the room was silent except for Hargrove's agitated breathing. Finally, Marshal Blackwood spoke. "I will need to telegraph my superiors for guidance on this matter. The legal questions are beyond my authority to resolve independently." He turned to Sheriff Taylor. "I request that Mrs. Finley remain at this location until I receive further instructions. Perhaps a week at most." Before either Zane or Zara could protest, Eli spoke up. "That seems reasonable, provided there's no attempt to remove Mrs. Finley against her will in the meantime." The compromise, while not ideal, offered a temporary resolution. Marshal Blackwood nodded in agreement, and even Hargrove's lawyer seemed to accept the necessity of legal clarification. Only Hargrove himself remained visibly furious, his cold eyes fixed on Zara with a mixture of rage and calculation that made Zane instinctively tighten his arm around her. "Very well," Sheriff Taylor concluded. "Mrs. Finley will remain at Thompson's Reach until further legal direction is received. Marshal Blackwood will return to town to send his inquiries. Mr. Hargrove and his representative are, of course, welcome to secure accommodations in Cottonwood Springs during the waiting period. The formality of the arrangements brought the tense meeting to a close. As the visitors prepared to depart, Hargrove managed to maneuver himself near Zara for a final private word. "This isn't over, Zaraline," he said, his voice low enough that only she and Zane could hear. "You've embarrassed me, cost me valuable time and resources. I don't forgive such insults easily." "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Hargrove," Zane observed coolly. Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Merely a statement of fact. Your wife knows me well enough to understand I always settle my accounts, one way or another." With that ominous parting, he turned and strode from the house, his rigid posture broadcasting his fury to anyone watching. Marshal Blackwood followed after a polite nod to the group, and Sheriff Taylor lingered only long enough to offer quiet congratulations on the marriage before he too departed. As the riders disappeared down the road toward town, the tension that had held Zara rigid throughout the confrontation finally released. She sagged slightly against Zane, her face pale but composed. "Well," Eli said into the silence, "that went about as well as could be expected. We've bought time at least." Margaret nodded in agreement, "And you two were magnificent. The very picture of a devoted couple." Zane felt Zara straighten beside him, gathering her composure. "It wasn't difficult," she said quietly, glancing up at him with a small smile that conveyed volumes. "But Hargrove is right about one thing: this isn't over. He'll find another approach, another legal angle." "Let him try," Zane replied, his protective instincts fully engaged. "We'll face whatever comes next together." As the Thompsons tactfully withdrew to give them privacy, Zane turned to face Zara directly. "Are you all right? That was quite an ordeal." She nodded, though worry still clouded her eyes. "I'm fine. But Maxwell's parting words concern me. He's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully, and he has resources we can't match." "He's also not in his element here," Zane pointed out. "Eastern money only goes so far in the territory, and he doesn't have the connections or knowledge of the land that we do." "True," Zara acknowledged. "Still, we should be cautious until this is truly resolved." She looked up at him, vulnerability briefly showing through her composed exterior. "I'm sorry to have brought this complication into your life, Zane. You've sacrificed your independence for my protection." Zane took her hands in his, meeting her gaze directly. "I haven't sacrificed anything I value more than what I've gained." The simple honesty of the statement surprised even him. "This marriage may have happened because of Hargrove's threats, but that doesn't make it any less real to me." The warmth that spread across Zara's face at his words was worth every moment of the morning's tension. "Nor to me," she replied softly. For a moment, they stood together in the quiet of Eli's study, newlyweds under extraordinary circumstances, yet finding genuine connection in the midst of external pressures. Whatever challenges Hargrove might still present, whatever adjustments their hasty union would require, they would face them as partners whose commitment, though born of necessity, was growing into something neither had expected to find on the Colorado frontier. The week that followed settled into an uneasy pattern. Zane and Zara remained at Thompson's Reach, adapting to their new status as husband and wife while waiting for word from Marshal Blackwood's superiors. To present a united front against potential challenges, Zane moved his belongings from the bunkhouse to Zara's cottage, which now became their shared home. The transition to married life under such circumstances might have been awkward, but a natural ease developed between them. Years of self-sufficient living had made them both practical about sharing space, and the genuine affection that had been growing for months provided a foundation for their developing relationship. Though the legal danger remained, daily life continued. Zara maintained her work with the ranch accounts, while Zane returned to his regular duties overseeing the cattle and training the younger hands. Evenings found them on the cottage porch, sharing the day's events and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other, building the intimate knowledge of partners rather than merely the affection of courting. "Did you ever think you'd marry?" Zara asked one such evening, 5 days after their hasty wedding. They sat side by side watching the sunset paint the western sky in vivid oranges and purples, a companionable silence having settled between them. Zane considered the question, his usual guardedness falling away in the comfort of her presence. "No," he admitted. "After my parents died, I figured attachment was a luxury I couldn't afford. Easier to stay mobile, unencumbered." "What changed?" Her voice was gentle, curious rather than demanding. A smile touched his lips as he glanced at her. You did, or rather, meeting you made me question assumptions I'd been living by for years. Such as that the frontier is no place for deeper connections. That loss is the inevitable outcome of caring, that survival means isolation. He shook his head slightly. Watching you choose freedom despite its risks, seeing your courage in building a new life, it made me wonder what I'd been protecting myself from all this time. Zara's hand found his in the gathering twilight. I've wondered the same about myself. In Boston, I was so focused on escape that I never really considered what I might be running toward. Freedom from my father and Maxwell seemed goal enough. And now, Zane asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She was quiet for a moment, her gaze on the distant mountains. Now I think perhaps true freedom isn't the absence of connection but the right kind of connection, not the bonds my father tried to force upon me, but ones I choose freely, knowing they strengthen rather than diminish me. The insight struck Zane as profound in its simplicity. He squeezed her hand gently, understanding passing between them without need for further words. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, a single rider coming up the lane toward the cottage. Both tensed instinctively, wary after days of watchful waiting. Zane rose, moving to stand at the top of the porch steps as the rider came into view in the fading light. Relief washed through him as he recognized Tommy Wilson, returning from his regular mail run to town. The young cowhand dismounted with his usual enthusiasm, waving a telegram. Mr. Finley, Mrs. Finley. Got news from town, he called, bounding up to the porch. Sheriff asked me to bring this straight to you. Zane accepted the folded paper, aware of Zara coming to stand beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. Thanks, Tommy. Any other word? The young man shook his head. Just that there's been no sign of Mr. Hargrove since yesterday. Sheriff says he left on the eastbound stage real sudden-like. This unexpected information caused Zane and Zara to exchange concerned glances. Hargrove's departure could mean many things, most likely that he had decided to pursue legal options from a position of greater advantage in the East. Thank you, Tommy, Zara said warmly. Would you like some water before you head back to the bunkhouse? While she saw to the young hand's comfort, Zane unfolded the telegram, holding it to catch the last of the daylight. Federal authority CONFIRMS marriage COMPLICATES extradition stop charges must be pursued through territorial court. If AT all stop returning to Boston to consult SUPERIORS stop, advise vigilance until formal resolution stop Marshal Blackwood. The message confirmed what they had hoped. Their marriage had created sufficient legal complication to prevent immediate extradition. But the warning at the end suggested Blackwood shared their concern that Hargrove might not be content with legal remedies. After Tommy departed, Zane handed the telegram to Zara. She read it quickly, a mixture of relief and lingering worry crossing her expressive features. So we've won, at least for now, she said cautiously. Zane nodded. The legal battle, yes, but Hargrove leaving so abruptly concerns me. It's not like him to admit defeat. No, Zara agreed, her intimate knowledge of the man evident in her tone. Maxwell would see retreat as weakness, unless he's planning something that requires his presence elsewhere, Zane finished the thought. Something we haven't anticipated. They stood together on the porch, the victory of the telegram tempered by uncertainty about what might follow. Zane slipped his arm around Zara's waist, drawing her close against the evening chill that had descended with the sun. Whatever he's planning, we'll face it, he said with quiet conviction, together. Zara leaned into him, her trust evident in the simple gesture. Together, she echoed, the word a promise between them. As they returned to the cottage, the telegram tucked safely in Zane's pocket, neither could shake the feeling that their struggle with Maxwell Hargrove was far from over. Yet in the warm light of their shared home, with the connection between them growing stronger each day, the threat seemed less daunting than it might have just weeks before. They had survived the first challenge to their unconventional union. Whatever came next, they would meet it not as isolated individuals, but as partners whose hastily formed marriage was deepening into something neither had expected to find. A bond strong enough to withstand both legal threats and the lingering shadows of their separate pasts. 2 weeks passed without word from Boston or further legal challenges. Life at Thompson's Reach settled into a rhythm that increasingly felt like normalcy for the newlyweds. Their cottage became a true home, its simple rooms transformed by shared meals, quiet conversations, and the gradual blending of their separate lives into a shared existence. The physical aspect of their marriage had developed naturally, initial hesitation giving way to genuine desire as the connection between them deepened. What had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into a relationship marked by both emotional and physical intimacy, a development that surprised and delighted them both. As August gave way to September, bringing cooler evenings and hints of the approaching autumn, Zane found himself experiencing a contentment he had never expected to find. The vigilance they maintained regarding Hargrove gradually eased as days passed without incident, allowing them to focus on building their life together rather than defending it from external threats. On a crisp Saturday morning, Zane rode into Cottonwood Springs with Eli to purchase supplies and check for mail. The town had grown noticeably even in the few months since Zara's arrival, new buildings rising along Main Street as settlers continued to flow westward. At the general store, Eli busied himself with ordering fencing supplies while Zane collected the mail, mostly business correspondence for the ranch, but also a letter addressed to Zara from her friend Clara in Boston. Seeing the Eastern postmark, Zane felt a flicker of concern, wondering what news it might contain about Hargrove's activities. "Any word from the marshal?" Eli asked as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. Zane shook his head. "Nothing official, but Zara's received a letter from Boston. Might give us some insight into what Hargrove is planning." Eli's bushy eyebrows drew together, been mighty quiet. "Makes a man wonder what's brewing." "My thoughts exactly," Zane agreed, his instincts for danger still active despite the weeks of peace. Their business concluded, they made one final stop at the sheriff's office. Taylor was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters with his usual methodical attention. "Finley Thompson," he greeted, looking up from his work, "what brings you to town?" "Supply run," Eli explained. "Thought we'd check if you've heard anything more about the Hargrove situation." The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his weathered face thoughtful. "Nothing official from Marshal Blackwood. But I did get an interesting telegram from a colleague in Denver yesterday. Seems Hargrove has been making inquiries about land holdings in the territory, specifically, properties adjacent to Thompson's Reach." The information sent a chill through Zane. "What kind of inquiries?" "Ownership records, water rights, mineral surveys, the kind of research someone does before making a significant investment." Taylor's expression was grave, "or before looking for leverage." Eli frowned deeply. "There's nothing for sale bordering my land. The Dawson place to the north, maybe, but old Pete would never sell to an Easterner." "Everyone has a price," Taylor observed grimly, "and Hargrove has demonstrated he's willing to spend considerably to get what he wants. Just thought you should be aware." The ride back to the ranch was sobered by this new information. Zane's mind worked through the implications, trying to anticipate Hargrove's strategy. If he couldn't force Zara's return through legal means, perhaps he was seeking to pressure her through proximity or financial leverage. At the cottage, Zara was waiting on the porch, her face lighting up at the sight of Zane. The simple joy of her welcome still caught him by surprise sometimes. The realization that someone was genuinely happy to see him return, that his presence mattered in such a fundamental way. "How was town?" she asked as he dismounted, coming to meet him halfway down the path. "Informative," Zane replied, pulling the letter from his jacket. "This came for you. From your friend Clara." Zara accepted the envelope eagerly, though concern flickered across her features at the mention of Boston. "Let's read it inside. I've made coffee." In the cozy main room of the cottage, Zane recounted the sheriff's information while Zara opened the letter. Her expression grew increasingly troubled as she read, confirming his suspicion that Clara's news would align with Taylor's warning. "Clara says Maxwell returned to Boston briefly, only to leave again after arranging substantial financial transactions," Zara reported, looking up from the pages. "He told my father he had identified an investment opportunity in Colorado that would resolve the Zara situation permanently." Those were his exact words, apparently. "Matches what the sheriff heard," Zane confirmed. "He's been investigating land near Thompson's Reach." Zara's brow furrowed in confusion. "But why? What could land purchases possibly have to do with his desire to bring me back to Boston?" Zane considered the question carefully. "Control. If he can't control you directly through legal means, perhaps he's seeking to control your environment, make life here untenable, force you to reconsider." Or simply to remain close to apply pressure over time, Zara suggested, her intimate knowledge of Hargrove's methods evident in her analysis. Maxwell is patient when it suits his purposes. He might believe that frontier life will eventually wear me down, that I'll choose to return to Boston when the novelty of independence fades. The assessment was shrewd, and Zane felt a surge of admiration for Zara's clear-eyed understanding of her adversary. "Do you think he's right," he asked, the question more vulnerable than he intended, "about the novelty fading?" Zara's response was immediate and firm. "No, this life, our life, is more genuinely satisfying than anything I experienced in Boston. The challenges here are real, but so is the sense of purpose, the connections." Her hand found his across the table. "I have no desire to return to gilded constraints, Zane. Not now, not evers." The conviction in her voice eased the momentary doubt her analysis had stirred. Zane turned his hand to clasp hers, the simple contact grounding and reassuring. "So we prepare for Hargrove's next move," he said practically. "Whatever land he's purchasing, whatever pressure he plans to apply, we face it together." Zara nodded, her expression resolute. "Together," she agreed. "And perhaps it's time we stopped merely reacting to Maxwell's schemes and took a more proactive approach to securing our future." "What did you have in mind?" A thoughtful smile curved Zara's lips. "I've been reviewing the ranch accounts for months now. Thompson's Reach is profitable, but there's potential for significant expansion with the right investment. The southeastern pasture Eli has been considering would increase the herd capacity by nearly 30%. Zane followed her thinking with growing interest. "But Eli's been hesitant to take on debt for the expansion, especially with cattle prices fluctuating." "Exactly, what if we proposed a partnership? My grandmother's inheritance isn't large by Boston standards, but here it would be sufficient for a meaningful investment. We could secure our future with the Thompsons while simultaneously establishing a position Hargrove couldn't easily undermine." The proposal was bold yet practical, exactly the kind of strategic thinking that had first drawn Zane to Zara beyond her obvious beauty. "You'd want to invest your inheritance in cattle ranching?" he asked, a note of wonder in his voice at how completely she had embraced frontier life. "In our future," Zara corrected gently. "In building something that's truly ours, that Maxwell can't threaten or take away. The money has been sitting in a Denver bank since I arrived, serving no purpose. I'd rather see it working for us, creating something meaningful." The use of "our" and "us" still sent a warmth through Zane that he was gradually becoming accustomed to, the shared identity they were creating together, so different from the solitary existence he had maintained for years. "We should discuss it with Eli," he agreed. "A formal partnership would benefit everyone involved. And send a clear message to Maxwell that my roots here are deepening, not weakening," Zara added, the strategic aspect of the move clearly appealing to her. As they continued discussing the details of the potential partnership, Zane marveled at how naturally they worked together, his practical knowledge of the land and cattle operations complementing her financial acumen and strategic thinking. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had evolved into a genuine partnership in every sense, their different strengths combining to create something neither could have built alone. Later that evening, they presented the partnership proposal to Eli and Margaret over dinner at the main house. The older couple listened attentively, exchanging glances that suggested they had already discussed similar possibilities. "It's a sound business proposition," Eli acknowledged when Zara had finished outlining the financial details. "The southeastern pasture would indeed increase our capacity significantly, and having the capital to expand without debt service would improve profitability from the outset." "But it's more than just business, isn't it?" Margaret observed shrewdly, her gaze moving between the younger couple. "This is about establishing permanence, creating something Hargrove can't easily disrupt." Zara nodded, appreciating the older woman's perception. "Yes, we believe Maxwell is planning some kind of long-term pressure campaign. Purchasing nearby land is likely just the beginning. By formalizing our connection to Thompson's Reach, we create a more defensible position." "And it's what we want," Zane added simply. "A stake in something meaningful, something we can build together." Eli stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I've been considering taking on a partner for some time now. Jenny has her life in Denver and without a son to inherit." He glanced at his wife, receiving a small nod of encouragement. "Truth is, Zane, I've thought of you in that role for years. You know this land as well as I do, work as hard, care as much. Adding Zara's financial acumen to the arrangement seems providential. The sincerity in the older man's voice touched Zane deeply. Eli had been the closest thing to family he'd had since his parents' deaths, but he had never presumed on that relationship or expected anything beyond fair employment. "We'd be honored," he said simply, emotion making more elaborate response difficult. "Well then," Eli declared, clapping his hands together decisively, "let's draw up the agreements properly. Equal partners in Thompson and Finley Ranch has a good sound to it, don't you think?" The new name hung in the air, significant in its implication of continuity and shared legacy. Margaret raised her glass, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "To Thompson and Finley Ranch," she toasted, "and to partnerships of all kinds." As glasses clinked in celebration, Zane felt a profound sense of rightness, of having found not just a wife in Zara but a true home and purpose after years of deliberate detachment. Whatever Hargrove might be planning, they would face it from a position of strength built on genuine connection rather than fear. The evening ended with plans to formalize the partnership agreement with the lawyer in Cottonwood Springs the following week. As Zane and Zara walked back to their cottage under a canopy of brilliant stars, their joined hands swung slightly between them in a gesture of shared contentment. "I never imagined this," Zane admitted quietly, the vastness of the night sky making honesty easier. "After my parents died, I convinced myself that attachments were dangerous, that the only safety lay in remaining apart. And now—" "And now," Zara prompted gently when he trailed off. Zane stopped, turning to face her in the starlight. "Now I can't imagine going back to that solitary existence. You've changed everything, Zara. How I see the world, how I see myself, what I believe is possible." The simple sincerity of his declaration touched Zara deeply. She reached up, her hand resting against his cheek in a gesture that had become familiar yet never lost its intimacy. "I came west seeking freedom from constraints," she said softly. "I never expected to find that true freedom would come from choosing the right connections rather than avoiding them altogether." As their lips met in the quiet darkness, Zane felt the last of his long-maintained barriers dissolve completely. The future remained uncertain, with Hargrove's schemes still unfolding and the harsh realities of frontier life ever present. But facing those challenges with Zara beside him no longer seemed daunting. Rather, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Together they were building something neither had believed possible, a life defined not by what they were running from but by what they were creating together. Whatever came next, that foundation would hold. The formal partnership agreement was signed in the lawyer's office in Cottonwood Springs the following Wednesday, transforming Thompson's reach into Thompson and Finley Ranch with the stroke of a pen. The legal document represented more than a business arrangement. It symbolized a new beginning for all involved, a commitment to shared future rather than isolated survival. As September progressed, bringing the first hints of autumn to the High Plains, they began implementing the expansion plans. Zara's inheritance, converted from Eastern Bank drafts to territorial currency, purchased the southeastern pasture that had long been Eli's ambition. The additional land would allow for significant herd growth over the coming years, increasing the ranch's prosperity and security. Work on fencing the new property began immediately, with all hands contributing to the effort. Even Zara joined in when she could be spared from the accounts, learning to string wire and set posts alongside the cowboys. Her willingness to participate in physical labor, so at odds with her Boston upbringing, earned her increasing respect among the hands who had initially viewed her with curiosity tinged with skepticism. Through it all, they remained vigilant for signs of Hargrove's next move. Sheriff Taylor confirmed that purchases had indeed been made of several properties bordering the ranch, though the exact buyer remained obscured through legal intermediaries. The pattern of acquisition suggested a deliberate encirclement, a strategy of containment rather than direct confrontation. "He's establishing position," Zane observed one evening as he and Zara reviewed a rough map Taylor had provided showing the purchased properties. "Like a chess player positioning pieces before the attack." Zara nodded, her intimate knowledge of Hargrove's methods proving invaluable. Maxwell always preferred indirect pressure to open confrontation. "He'll try to limit our options, constrain our movements, before making any direct demands." "Then we continue as planned," Zane decided. "Strengthen our position, build our resources, prepare for whatever comes." The strategy seemed sound, but fate had other ideas. On the last day of September, as golden light bathed the plains in late afternoon splendor, a wagon approached the ranch from the direction of town. At first glance, it appeared to be just another delivery from the general store. Only as it drew closer did Zane, working with the hands on the new corral, recognize Sheriff Taylor driving with an unfamiliar woman beside him. Something in the sheriff's expression as he pulled up sent a warning through Zane's experienced instincts. He excused himself from the work crew and approached the wagon, wiping dusty hands on his trousers. "Sheriff," he greeted cautiously, "wasn't expecting you today." Taylor's weathered face was grave. "Afternoon, Finley, is your wife about?" "There's someone here who needs to speak with her, urgently." The woman beside him was perhaps 50, dressed in plain but quality traveling clothes, her gray-streaked hair pulled back severely from a face that showed signs of recent strain. Something in her bearing, a certain dignity despite obvious fatigue, reminded Zane uncomfortably of Zara. "She's in the main house with Margaret," Zane replied, his guard rising. "Mind telling me what this is about?" The woman spoke before Taylor could answer. "You must be Mr. Finley." "I'm Alina Pierce, Zara's aunt, her mother's sister. I've come from Boston with news that cannot wait." The familial connection was immediately evident now that she'd identified herself. There was a resemblance around the eyes, the same straight posture and clear gaze that characterized Zara's presence. "Aunt Alina is trustworthy," Sheriff Taylor added quietly. "I've spent the afternoon questioning her to be certain this isn't one of Hargrove's tricks. I believe her story is genuine." Still wary but recognizing the sheriff's judgment as sound, Zane nodded. "I'll take you to Zara. But I warn you, if this brings her harm, family connection won't protect you." Alina Pierce regarded him with what might have been approval. "I see my niece has found someone appropriately protective. Good. She'll need that strength for what's coming." The ominous statement did nothing to ease Zane's concern. He helped the older woman down from the wagon and escorted her to the main house, Sheriff Taylor following at a respectful distance. Inside, they found Zara and Margaret at the dining table, heads bent over account books in their regular afternoon review of ranch operations. Zara looked up at their entrance, her welcoming smile for Zane freezing as she registered the unfamiliar woman beside him. "Aunt Alina," she gasped, rising so quickly her chair nearly toppled. Why?" "Zara, my dear." Alina crossed the room with surprising speed, grasping her niece's hands tightly. "Thank God I've found you in time." "In time for what?" Zane asked, the sense of impending crisis growing stronger. Alina glanced around the room, noting Margaret's presence and the sheriff waiting near the door. "Perhaps we should speak privately. The matter is delicate." "These are my family now," Zara stated firmly, recovering from her initial shock. "Whatever you've come to say can be said in front of them." The older woman studied her niece's face, seeming to assess the changes the months in Colorado had wrought. Whatever she saw there appeared to satisfy her. "Very well, I've come to warn you. Your father has suffered a collapse, a stroke the doctors call it. He's not expected to recover." Zara paled visibly, her composure slipping at this unexpected news. Despite the complicated relationship with her father, the gravity of his condition clearly affected her. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said quietly, "but I don't understand why you've come all this way to tell me in person. A telegram." "It's not just his illness," Alina interrupted grimly. "Before he lost consciousness, your father signed documents granting Maxwell Hargrove complete control over all Valenti holdings, including legal guardianship over you." "That's absurd," Zara exclaimed. "I'm 22 years old and legally married. My father has no authority to assign guardianship over me." Alina's expression was grave. "The documents claim mental instability on your part, a condition supposedly recognized before you fled Boston. They cite your irrational departure as evidence, along with affidavits from doctors who never examined you but were handsomely paid to provide opinions. With your father incapacitated and these papers bearing his signature, Maxwell now controls everything, the business, the properties, and legally you." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Zane moved to Zara's side, his hand finding hers in instinctive support. "How did you learn of this?" Sheriff Taylor asked, his lawman's caution evident. "I work as secretary to the family lawyer," Alina explained. "I saw the documents come through the office, recognized the danger to Zara, and took immediate action. Maxwell believes I'm visiting relatives in New York. I had perhaps a 2-day head start before he realizes I'm gone and guesses my destination. But these claims are patently false, Margaret protested. Surely they wouldn't stand up to proper legal scrutiny. Aliner's laugh held no humor. In Boston, with Hargrove's money and connections, the courts would take months to sort it out, during which time Maxwell would have effective control. He's already filing to have Zara's marriage declared invalid on grounds of mental incapacity at the time of consent. Zane felt Zara's hand tighten in his, anger rising at the lengths Hargrove would go to possess what he considered rightfully his. Even if he manages that in Boston courts, it wouldn't automatically apply here in the territory, he pointed out. Our marriage is legally recognized under territorial law. For now, Alina agreed. But Maxwell is nothing if not thorough. He's been laying groundwork here as well, purchasing property, establishing relationships with territorial officials, building a case that will eventually reach even here. The land purchases, Zara murmured, understanding dawning. Not just to pressure us, but to establish himself as a legitimate territorial businessman with standing in local courts. Sheriff Taylor nodded grimly. Makes sense. Judge Harrison has already shown he's amenable to Eastern influence. Given time and the right approach, Hargrove could potentially get a sympathetic hearing here as well. So what do we do? Zane asked, his mind already working through defensive strategies. How do we fight this? Alina looked at her niece directly. That depends on what Zara wants. Running has bought time but not resolution. At some point, the past must be confronted directly if there's to be any hope of a truly free future. All eyes turned to Zara, whose face had taken on the determined expression Zane had come to recognize when she faced difficult decisions. He could almost see the quick calculations behind her green eyes, the strategic assessment of options and risks. Aunt Alina is right, she finally said. We've been reactive, defensive. Maxwell's approach has been the opposite, patient, methodical, building toward an endgame we've only glimpsed. Her gaze met Zane's, seeking understanding. I need to face this directly. We need to counter his strategy with one of our own. Zane nodded, trust in her judgment outweighing his protective instincts. What do you propose? Zara turned back to her aunt. The guardianship claim relies on allegations of mental instability, correct? Allegations made without proper examination. Alina nodded. Correct. Maxwell secured opinions from 2 physicians who never met you but were willing to speculate based on reported behaviors, primarily your departure from Boston and rejection of the marriage arrangement. Then we counter with reality, Zara stated firmly. We gather sworn statements from respected members of the community here. The sheriff, Reverend Davies, the Thompsons, the banker in town who's handled my financial transactions. All testifying to my sound judgment, my business acumen, my rational behavior. Sheriff Taylor was nodding thoughtfully. Could work. Territorial courts tend to favor local testimony over distant claims, especially when the distant claims have clear financial motivation. But that's defensive still, Zara continued, her strategic mind working visibly. To truly resolve this, we need to undermine Maxwell's position entirely. She looked to her aunt. The guardianship document, it specifically names Maxwell rather than some neutral party like a family lawyer. Yes, Alina confirmed. Most irregular, which is partly what alerted me to the situation. Normally such authority would be granted to a legal professional or family member, not a business associate with personal interest in the ward. Then there's our vulnerability, Zara declared. If we can demonstrate that Maxwell manipulated an ill man into signing documents that serve his personal interests rather than his daughter's welfare, the entire arrangement could be invalidated. The boldness of the counter-strategy was impressive, but Zane saw a significant obstacle. That would likely require testimony about your father's condition at the time of signing, evidence we don't have access to in Boston. Alina's expression shifted subtly. Not yet. But I have access to the family home, to the staff who witnessed your father's decline. If provided with specific questions and legal authority, I could gather sworn statements. It's risky, Sheriff Taylor warned. If Hargrove discovers your involvement, Mrs. Pierce, you'd be vulnerable to retaliation. I'm an old woman with little to lose, Alina replied firmly. My sister, Zara's mother, extracted a promise from me before she died that I would watch over her daughter. I failed her once by not acting sooner to prevent this situation. I won't fail her again. The determination in the older woman's voice reminded Zane powerfully of Zara, the same core of steel beneath a composed exterior. The family resemblance went beyond physical features to character itself. Then we need to act quickly, Zane decided, his natural caution balanced by recognition of the opportunity. Before Hargrove realizes Alina has reached us and takes steps to neutralize her access in Boston. For the next several hours, the dining room table became a war council of sorts. Sheriff Taylor provided legal context for territorial law, while Alina offered insights into Boston legal practices and Hargrove's business operations. Margaret contributed her practical wisdom, and Eli joined them after being summoned from the fields, bringing his knowledge of local politics and connections. Throughout the planning, Zane watched Zara with deepening admiration. The woman who had fled Boston in fear for her freedom had transformed into a strategic thinker capable of orchestrating a multifaceted counteroffensive. The courage had always been there, but now it was paired with confidence and clarity of purpose. By nightfall, a comprehensive plan had taken shape. Alina would return east immediately, gathering sworn statements from household staff and medical professionals who had actually treated Zara's father. Meanwhile, Zara and Zane would secure local testimonials about her mental competence and business acumen. Sheriff Taylor would quietly investigate Hargrove's land purchases for any irregularities that might undermine his standing in territorial courts. It's a sound strategy, Eli concluded as they reviewed the final details. But timing will be crucial. If Hargrove realizes what we're doing before all pieces are in place, he will strike with everything he has to stop us. Zane's jaw tightened. Then we make sure he doesn't find out until it's too late. Part 1: The Shadow War. The plan was set in motion within the hour. Under the cover of a moonless sky, Zane escorted Alina Pierce to a junction 10 miles south, where she could flag down the eastbound stage without being seen in Cottonwood Springs. The farewell between aunt and niece was brief but fierce. "Be careful, Aunt Alina," Zara whispered, hugging the older woman on the dark roadside. "He is dangerous." "So am I, my dear," Alina replied with a grim smile. "He forgets that I handled your grandfather's correspondence for 20 years. I know where the skeletons are buried." Zane watched the stagecoach disappear into the dust, then rode back to the ranch, his senses alert to every shadow. The war had begun. For the next 2 weeks it was a quiet war. Hargrove, seemingly realizing that his legal maneuvering had stalled, shifted tactics just as Zara had predicted. He didn't attack directly, he squeezed. First, it was the water rights. A dam appeared mysteriously on the creek that fed the Thompson South pasture, land owned by a squatter who had suddenly come into money. Zane and the hands spent 2 grueling days clearing it, claiming rightful flow, only to find fence lines cut 3 miles away the next morning. Then came the intimidation. Suppliers in town suddenly lost orders meant for the ranch. A wagon of lumber for the new barn was overturned on the road. Through it all, Zara did not retreat to the safety of the cottage. She traded her ledgers for riding leathers. She rode out with Zane and Eli to inspect the damage, her sharp mind analyzing Hargrove's patterns. "He's trying to exhaust us," she said one evening, wiping dust from her face as they sat by the fire. "He wants us too tired and too poor to fight the legal battle when it comes." Zane looked at her, sun-browned, tired, but burning with a resilience that awed him. She wasn't the delicate Boston flower Hargrove thought he was crushing. She was tempered steel. "He doesn't know who he's fighting," Zane said, reaching out to take her hand. "He thinks he's fighting a business rival. He doesn't know he's fighting a family." Part 2: The Standoff. The escalation came on a Tuesday in late October. The air was crisp with the threat of early frost when a cloud of dust appeared on the road, too fast to be a wagon, too large to be a single rider. "Riders coming," Tommy Wilson shouted from the watchtower they had built on the barn. Zane was in the corral. He grabbed his rifle and ran for the house, meeting Eli on the porch. Zara came out a moment later, carrying a shotgun. She stood between them, her face pale but set. It was Hargrove, but he wasn't alone and he wasn't waiting for lawyers. He rode at the head of a dozen men, hard-looking mercenaries with tied-down holsters. Beside him rode a man Zane recognized with a sinking heart. Deputy Marshal Collins, a man known to be purchasable for the right price. They pulled up in the yard, the horses milling nervously. "Sheriff Taylor isn't with you," Eli called out, his hand resting near the colt on his hip. "The sheriff is indisposed," Hargrove shouted back, his voice thin with triumph. "And Marshal Blackwood has been recalled to Denver on urgent business." Deputy Collins is in charge. Collins stepped forward holding up a piece of paper. I have an emergency order here from the territorial governor, he announced, though he wouldn't look Zane in the eye. Declaring Zara Valenti a fugitive and a danger to herself. She is to be remanded to the custody of her guardian immediately. I have no guardian but my husband, Zara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear across the yard. That marriage is a fraud, Hargrove screamed, his composure finally cracking. You are mentally incompetent and I am taking you home. He signaled to his men, grab her. Touch her and you die, Zane said. He didn't shout. He raised his rifle, leveling it at Hargrove's chest. Around the yard, the Thompson ranch hands emerged from the barns and bunkhouses. They weren't gunfighters, but they held Winchesters and shotguns, and they looked angry. They outnumbered Hargrove's mercenaries 2-1. The mercenaries hesitated. They were paid to intimidate farmers, not fight a war against entrenched cowboys. You have no authority here, Zara yelled, stepping off the porch to stand beside Zane. She looked directly at the deputy. If you let this man take me, you are kidnapping a lawful resident of this territory. Do you think the circuit judge will overlook that? Do you think my aunt, who is currently speaking with the federal authorities in Boston, will stay silent? Hargrove froze. Your aunt is in New York. Is she? Zara smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. Or is she handing over my father's true medical records to the district attorney? Hargrove's face went white. Take her, he shrieked, take them all. One of the mercenaries reached for his gun. Crack, a shot rang out, not from Zane and not from the mercenaries. It came from the road behind them. Everyone turned. A buggy was coming down the lane, flanked by 4 U.S. cavalry riders. Driving the buggy was Sheriff Taylor, and sitting beside him looking dusty but imperious was a man in a black judicial robe. Drop your weapons, Sheriff Taylor bellowed, in the name of the territorial court. Part 3. The verdict. The yard went deadly silent. The mercenaries, realizing the tide had turned disastrously, slowly raised their hands. Deputy Collins looked like he wanted to vanish into the earth. The buggy stopped. The man in black climbed down. It was Judge Henry Whitman, the fearsome hanging judge of the circuit court, and climbing down behind him, looking exhausted but triumphant, was Alina Pierce. Aunt Alina, Zara breathed, clutching Zane's arm. Judge Whitman surveyed the scene, the armed men, the terrified deputy, the defiant ranchers. He turned his gaze to Hargrove. Maxwell Hargrove, the judge rumbled. I have just received a very interesting packet of telegrams from the district attorney in Boston. It seems there are serious questions regarding the authenticity of certain medical affidavits you presented. These people are lying, Hargrove sputtered, pointing at Zara. She is insane. She stole from her father. And yet, the judge continued, his voice like grinding stones. Mrs. Pierce here has provided sworn testimony from your own household staff that you physically guided Mr. Valenti's hand to sign documents while he was semi-conscious. Hargrove backed up, his horse dancing. That's hearsay. You have no jurisdiction over Massachusetts business. I have jurisdiction over fraud committed in my territory, the judge snapped. And over the attempted corruption of a territorial deputy. He glared at Collins, who was shaking. Deputy, you are under arrest, and Mr. Hargrove. The judge pointed a long finger. You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted kidnapping. Sheriff, take him. Hargrove tried to turn his horse, perhaps to run, but Zane was faster. He grabbed the bridle of Hargrove's mount, jerking the animal to a stop. It's over, Maxwell, Zane said, looking up at the man who had haunted them for months. You lost. Hargrove looked down at Zane, then at Zara. The arrogance finally drained out of him, leaving only a small, petty man. She's nothing, he spat. She's a ruined woman. She's free, Zane said. Sheriff Taylor pulled Hargrove from the saddle and slapped irons on his wrists. As they dragged him away, Zara ran to Alina, embracing her aunt with tears streaming down her face. Part 4. Freedom Chosen. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal depositions and official paperwork, but by evening, the ranch was quiet. The mercenaries had been run out of the county. Hargrove and Collins were in the jail wagon headed for Denver. Zane found Zara on the porch of their cottage. She was holding a letter Alina had brought, the confirmation that her father had passed away 3 days after Alina left Boston. He's gone, she said softly as Zane sat beside her. And the new will, the real one from before he got sick, leaves the shipping shares to me in trust. You're wealthy, Zane said. The reality of it hit him. The threat was gone. Hargrove was gone. She was rich, independent, and safe. The reason for their marriage, the protection, had evaporated. Zane stood up and walked to the railing, looking out at the mountains. His heart felt heavy, like a stone in his chest. He knew what he had to do. He had to be honorable one last time. "Zara," he said, not turning around, "you're safe now, truly safe. You have your inheritance. You can go anywhere, do anything."
"I can," she agreed.
He heard her stand up. "The marriage," Zane forced the words out. "We did it to stop Hargrove, to give you a legal shield. You don't need a shield anymore. You shouldn't be tied to a ranch hand in Colorado when you could be running a shipping empire in Boston." He took a breath. "I won't hold you to it. We can get an annulment, or a divorce."
"I'll make it easy."
Silence stretched between them. He waited for her to agree, to thank him for his help and start packing her trunks. "Is that what you want, Zane?" Her voice was closer now.
"To be free of me."
"I want you to be happy," he said, his voice breaking. "I want you to choose your life, not be forced into one." "I did choose," she said. He turned. She was standing right there, holding the marriage certificate. She looked at it, then looked at him. "I told you once," she said, her green eyes shining, "I would rather face uncertainty as a free woman than certainty as a possession, but this," she touched his chest, "this isn't possession.
This is home."
She tore the certificate in half. Zane stared at the pieces falling to the floor. "Zara." "The paper doesn't matter," she whispered. "The legal protection doesn't matter. You are the man who stood beside me when I had nothing. You are the man who married me to save me, and offered to let me go to save me." She reached up and cupped his face. "I don't want Boston. I don't want the shipping empire. I want the partnership we built. I want the evenings on this porch. I want you." Zane let out a shuddering breath, the walls around his heart finally, completely turning to dust. He pulled her into him, kissing her with a desperation and a joy that erased all the fear of the last months. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you, Zara." "I know," she smiled. "I love you too, Cowboy."
Epilogue.
1 year later. The sign above the gate had been repainted. It now read, "Thompson and Finley Ranch Est." 1872. Zane Finley rode the fence line of the New South pasture, the cattle fat and grazing on the rich grass. He tipped his hat to the hands as he passed, turning his horse toward the house. As he rode into the yard, he saw two figures on the porch of the main house. Margaret was sitting in her chair, and Zara was standing beside her, holding a bundle in her arms. Zane dismounted and walked up the steps, dusting off his chaps. "He's finally asleep," Zara whispered, rocking the baby gently. Zane looked down at his son. The boy had his dark hair and Zara's nose. He reached out a calloused finger, and the baby's tiny hand curled around it. "He's strong," Zane said, pride swelling in his chest. "Like his father," Zara said, leaning her head on Zane's shoulder. "And stubborn like his mother," Eli chuckled, coming out the door with 2 glasses of lemonade. Zane put his arm around his wife and son, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the land they owned, the home they had built, and the life they had chosen. He had spent so long running from connection, fearing the pain of loss. But standing here, anchored by love, he finally understood. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was living.